It's 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. And a conversation this morning that I think is... it might be the first time that we've ever had it. I'm trying to find the thing that... You've got to be careful, haven't you, online? And there's a chance in the second hour we'll be looking at some developments in the area of social media. Very strange developments, but I never know how interested you are. If you're heavily engaged in Twitter or Facebook or whatever one, TikTok and Insta... then obviously you're interested in things that happen there. But if you're not heavily engaged in it, then how interested are you in... I don't know, but I think that it's certainly in the case of Twitter, it's a proven electoral influence. So that may indeed be why Elon Musk bought it in the first place. So we may have a look at that in the second hour. But when you're trying to find things online, you have to be careful, don't you? You can find the wrong thing sometimes. So I found two pictures of cheques signed by Alan Sugar. And I presume, maybe he did both of them. But the point was he was showing how much tax he pays. He was showing how much personal tax he pays. In January of 1 year, 2017, he published a picture of a cheque. I mean, it's actually extraordinary. For £56,646,000 and £28.44. I wonder what they spent the 44 pence on. And this cheque is payable to HM Revenue and Customs. I mean, it looks like a joke, doesn't it? That's his personal tax for 1 year. And there's another cheque around in which he appears to be paying almost double that, perhaps in a different year. And it's such an interesting thing, isn't it? That simple fact right there. Here is me paying £60 million in tax. And I'm telling you this, I think in the case of the original one, it was because people accused him of being unimpressed by Jeremy Corbyn because he thought that Jeremy Corbyn was going to make him pay more tax. To which, responding by going, look, here's the 60 million quid I paid in tax this year. It's a pretty boss move, I think. And of course, the wealthier you are, the easier it becomes to avoid the sort of percentage tariffs by which the little people have to live, by which the little people have to abide. I'm tempted. I mean, I'm not going to do an entire hour on the question of your immediate reaction to a 7-year-old tweet from Alan Sugar, but it speaks to something I find fascinating. I really do. So 6 minutes after 10 is the time. The notion of paying tax being the most patriotic act for a non-military person to do. That's not fair, is it? A non-public servant to do. If you work in the public service, you are essentially working for your fellow citizens, whether you're a paramedic or whether you're a permanent secretary in the Department of Agriculture and Food. You are working for your fellow citizens. I don't know how vocational. I think there are gradations of vocationalism, aren't there? So, I mean, some people I can get a bit dewy-eyed about the military, but most people I know who've joined the military could not wait to join. It's not quite like being conscripted and sent to the front. They dreamt of being soldiers from a very young age, or seamen. Or in the RAF. I don't think I know any women that went into the Navy, so don't pick me up on my vocabulary there. But it wasn't as if they were motivated exclusively by a desire to serve king and country or queen and country, that they really, really, really wanted to do it. And you know, the same is true for other jobs as well. People dream of being doctors. Little girls and little boys dream of being nurses. But you see what I mean. In terms of the satisfaction for a job involving the service that you do for others, I think it would apply right across the public sector, whether you are driving a train or whether you are driving a desk. There is something involved in that job, and therefore, to varying degrees in your job satisfaction, that is derived from the pleasure that you give other people. Look, you can do it in the private sector, for heaven's sake. Obviously, you can do it in the private sector. If you're a restaurateur, you derive enormous pleasure from feeding people delicious grub. If you're a leading, well, even a non-leading radio presenter, you derive enormous pleasure from the comfort and company that you bring into people's lives. And there are a few things more warming of the cockles than when those people tell you about the importance that you have in their, not just in their day, but in their life. But the reward in the public sector is measurably different from the reward in the private sector, because you are doing something for the good of society, for all of society, not just for the people in the restaurant that day, not just for the people tuning into your radio show that morning, but potentially as a doctor or a nurse, as a train driver or a soldier, as a police officer or a civil servant working in Whitehall. You are arguably, well, maybe not even arguably, you are doing something for the good of the country, which makes paying tax for almost all of the rest of us the biggest act of public service we can do, doesn't it? I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, how mad do I sound already as I move my way towards this question? That the notion that we shouldn't balk at the idea of people wanting to pay more tax. So the reason this is in the news today, the reason that I have found Alan Sugar bouncing into my consciousness, is because of the bloke who founded Higgity Pies and some of his mates. They have set up a campaign designed to urge Rachel Reeves to increase capital gains tax, something that we are pretty confident she's minded to do. The only question is how, by how much. And they insist that requiring the wealthiest people in the country to pay a higher percentage on profits made from the sale of their existing assets would not, as critics argue, damage investment and entrepreneurship. I don't know whether that's true or not. This isn't necessarily the phone-in that we're going to have. If you were resentful of tax, if you did see tax, as many business people do, many individuals do, tax as obstacles to be negotiated, penalties to be avoided, and you had 10 million quid to invest, then the returns were likely to be much higher in one territory because of tax legislation than they were in the other, and it was an equal choice otherwise. Then if you prioritised profit over everything else, including loyalty to the country that you call home, then you'd stick your money in a foreign fund, wouldn't you? But patriotic is a fascinating world, an incredibly fascinating word. Patriotic millionaires urge Reeves to raise taxes on the rich. What do you think of that? I reckon we could probably break down responses to this between a fairly clear split between a kind of idealistic admiration and an absolutely pant-wetting hilarity at the absurdity of the situation. Why do we see tax as something to be chiselled away at and avoided? Why is that check of Alan Sugar's such a newsworthy moment, such an arresting moment? Do you know what I would do? I would put my... I would put tax revenues, individual tax payments, I would link them to the honours system. You'd obviously have to have some sort of vetting in place, otherwise you could end up with the son of a KGB spy in the House of Lords. But you would need to have a vetting system in place, but the people who pay the most tax, the most income tax, become immediately the people at the front of the queue for a certain type of honour. I mean, this wouldn't push the lollipop ladies out of the picture or the people getting rewarded for years of public service that hasn't been well rewarded financially. But the people who pay the most tax would be the people who are at the front of the queue for honours. And I don't understand how, as a country, we've become a place where we see tax almost as a punishment. It's a bit like what have the Romans ever done for you? You know that clip, and you look at the roads, and you look at the army, and you look at the electricity. Oh, that's different slightly. No, it isn't. The national grid. You look at the railways. You look at all of the stuff that has at one point or another been nationally provided, been paid for by the tax. You look at the NHS. You look at the welfare state. You look at the police service. And yet we have in this country and in other countries, although I would be interested in international comparisons, particularly with Scandinavia, where tax rates are much higher but public services are much better. How hard do you think it would be to turn paying tax into a more patriotic act? And let me do it the other way around as well. So I'm a top rate tax earner. That wouldn't come as a massive surprise. The threshold isn't huge. And now that the podcasts and the books are kicking off, I'm paying more tax than I ever thought I would, because I'm earning more money than I ever thought I would. I'm not boasting. I just can't really ask you to talk to me about your interests in these issues without declaring mine. And obviously there are days when you see the column, especially as you get towards the end of the tax year and you've got the running total of how, and you look at that and you think, bloody hell, what could I do with that? And then you think, well, my kids wouldn't have schools to go to, or the hospital wouldn't be round the corner, or the army, what's left of it, wouldn't be on red alert for potential problems, or if, God forbid, something went wrong for me or for people I care about, or for people I don't even know but care about as an act of patriotism, as in you. The welfare state wouldn't be there to look after you. People who are, never going to be, people who are never going to earn what I pay in tax in a year are not going to get the support. It's such a patriotic impulse, right? So why is it so rare? 0345 6060 973. I don't want to have a fight this morning, I don't think, not before 11, because if you've got a very negative view towards tax, and it's a very popular perspective, I want to know why. Listen, we can do some givens on this. We can obviously say if there's huge and obvious evidence of money being wasted, then you can feel a little bit resentful about the proportion or the share of that money that you have earned and paid in tax. But that's got to come from a space of negativity. You've got to be thinking, I don't want to pay. Why? Why do we not see tax as a more patriotic act? Paying tax as a more patriotic act. And, for once, I think I will allow a little side order this morning of whether or not I sound crackers to you. So, I've always been in favour of a 50% top tax rate. Until public services are restored or until debts are paid. I'm quite naive about matters fiscal, as you know. And as I get older, the less cool I think that is. The kid at the back of the class who's too poetic to understand maths and economics. Sadly, I was the kid at the back of the class feeling that way even when he was at the London School of Economics, but that's a story for a different day. So this idea of course, in a country where people are sleeping on the streets, hospital waiting lists are out of control, our prisons are bursting at the seams, of course those of us who earn the most should pay more than we would if everything was going swimmingly. But those who have the most should be paying, we've had this conversation already, the same percentage on the profits they get on their profits, the reward they get for being rich. They should be paying the same percentage that the rest of us pay. So this is one of the most nebulous questions I've asked you in a long, long time. But it's one I really want you to answer. And it's why is the relationship between patriotism or public duty or altruism and tax so corrupted in this country? Is it patriotism, asks Paul, or just being civic? I think it's both. 0345 6060 973. Why don't we see paying tax as a privilege and a pleasure, entirely and intrinsically allied to the quality of life that the average citizen enjoys, instead of seeing it largely as a penalty and a punishment? All right? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 10:17 is the time. The bar is low this morning. If you've got something interesting and thoughtful to say, I want to hear it, because this is not a normal phone-in question, which means it might not get normal phone-in answers. But it's a good point, isn't it? It's not crackers. You've got millionaires queuing up to say we should be paying more capital gains tax. You've got Alan Sugar posting a picture of a cheque for £56 million, his personal income tax for that year. And rather than carrying them through the streets on our shoulders, there's a little bit of all of us, I think, who kind of go, oh, all right, mate, on your jog, but it's not for me. Why is that? What is it? What's going on? And give me international comparisons as well. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:18. 20 minutes after 10. And then your age is going to be relevant to this as well, not just your ability to make comparisons to other countries, but seeing tax as a bad thing. If you think about it, as an act of national self-sabotage. And yet, I vaguely recall tales of the 1970s, I think when Harold Wilson was in Downing Street, and people like John Lennon were required to pay something like 90 or 95% tax on their income above a certain threshold. Anyway, there's a lot to get through. So I should probably shut up and start listening, shouldn't I, instead of talking. Ben is in Leigh-on-Sea. Ben, what would you like to say? What made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
thanks for taking my call. Actually, it's interesting because it's a conversation I've had my wife numerous occasions about how people who profess to love the country are so frightened or resistant to pay for it.
Yes.
And I think part of the problem, there's a few things, but I think part of the problem is it sort of comes down from the top, right? When you hear about very high worth net individuals having numerous tax avoidance schemes being in place, and then you work your way down the pay scale and you get to good old PAYE, where you've got absolutely no option but to pay whatever the tax rate is. People feel a little bit betrayed, if that's the right word.
People looking up feel a little bit betrayed.
Yeah. I mean, why? Like the suckers, they're mugs. That's why people pay the builders and pay them cash. They don't pay the VAT. That's tax avoidance, right?
It becomes a culture. It becomes a culture of encouraging a little bit of ducking and diving.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Anything to try and reduce your tax bill. And the second point of that is to your point, right, which is nobody actually sees what the benefits or what the actual tax pays for. They just hear about the waste and diversity training in the council.
Yes.
Not the potholes get fixed, the NHS gets paid for, your children go to school for free. All we ever hear about is the penalties of tax, never the benefits. And I think when you talk about foreign, the Nordics, other countries where they have a higher tax rate, they take pride because they actually enjoy seeing the benefits of what their tax pays for. And I was saying to your,
do you think they do? I mean, Alan Sugar seems like a fairly grumpy old fella, doesn't he? I mean, I love the idea of him sitting there, on his balcony smoking a cigar, looking at the ambulances go past and the school children go off to school and the police on their patrol and thinking, I have paid a lot of money to create this. But it doesn't seem to have made him very happy.
Well, yeah,
we might be focusing too much on Alan Sugar here, Ben. My bad, my fault, I think.
No, I mean, I don't know him personally, so no. I'll take your word. But to the point is that I think in Sweden you can actually go online and you can see the tax rates being paid by your neighbours.
Good Lord!
There's much more transparency about those tax rates. And as I say, I think people just really talk about the benefits of paying tax, what it pays for, and we'd all pay more tax if things improved. Well, I believe we'd all be happy to pay a bit more tax. Maybe it's just me.
There's two things going on there. If the improvement was more widely reported, it doesn't necessarily. It isn't necessarily the case that the needle has to nudge upwards in terms of provision or what's provided by the tax take. Everybody wants to see less waste, but you're right. I mean, how many think tanks, so-called think tanks, secretly funded lobby groups calling themselves think tanks exist that are dedicated to telling us what the Romans did for us, to pointing out all of the things that if you pay less tax, you will get less of, which is almost everything, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, and now Robert Generic's trying to get himself as the new leader of the Conservative Party, promising to reduce it even more, so even less stuff will be paid for.
By cutting welfare, which is already, according to most experts, about as close to the bone as it can get. So I think...
punching downwards, right? Downwards.
And these are all parts of the answer to the question, actually. The idea of why this has happened. I mean, I'm obviously obsessed with the secretly funded lobby groups masquerading as think tanks, but that's only because I understand the depth of the damage that they've done to this country, up to and including Liz Truss's premiership, whereas, of course, most people aren't getting that information because it's not hardly likely to be published or broadcast in the organs that promote these people and that collude with these people and work symbiotically with these organisations. But that's got to be part of it. The newspapers do it because they're owned by immensely wealthy people who They're largely owned by immensely wealthy people. Certainly the Murdoch and the Rothermere end of the market are owned, and previously the Barclays, are owned by immensely wealthy people who are obviously dedicated to hanging on to as much of their non-earned cash as they can. So the editorial policy, I always remember on Industrial Action, a few years after I left Fleet Street, opening up my old newspaper to see a withering editorial about strikes and the appalling excesses of unions. And I knew for a fact that at the time, the staff on that newspaper were being treated appallingly by the owners, by the managers, and the only way in which they could push back against it was by union membership. So I guess it's somehow the same game, isn't it? You're persuading people that they want to be opposed to tax increases for the wealthy, even though it is actually against their own interests to be so. Ben, thank you. Claire is in Hull. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi, yes. Yeah, I've just called in to say that I really have mixed views, but the points I would like to make is, well, first of all, just in terms of a little bit of background, I was a mother at 16.
Gosh.
So I drew on the public purse for probably 3 or 4 years before I got a full-time job, put my daughter in nursery, and did a part-time degree for 5 years. So now I'm in a position, I'm nearly 50, I'm a net income contributor, I'm a 40% taxpayer. So essentially...
How do you know you're a net income contributor? Just out of curiosity, I'm not nitpicking.
Well, apparently the definition of that is, I read in one of the papers, is I'm paying more money in than I'm pulling out the state.
But how do you know? How do you know that? Because I mean, if you got a relative who's poorly or someone who's relying on the NHS, how do we calculate that? Do you mean simply in terms of, like, for you personally, the measurable?
For me personally, I have no dependents. I was looking after an elderly father, but again, he was self-funded. He had to pay the £1,400 a week care. So, that all helps build the picture. But to your point, have I sat down and done the maths? No, I haven't.
No, I hadn't come across the phrase before. I see it in the context of immigration quite often, but I've never really applied it to myself. I presume I'm in the same category as you.
Yes. Anyway, the point I'm making is the pot is only so big. There is only so many people working and paying into that pot. There's a massive unemployment problem. And as we all know, a great deal of that problem is that people are opting out of working as if it's a choice.
Yeah.
We've also got the immigration situation, and I don't really want to delve into that.
Well, no, you must now, because you've raised it, because that's then...
We've got a whole stack of people.
Yes, but immigrants are net contributors more so than people who were born here. And, of course, we don't shoulder the cost of educating them or providing healthcare for them for the first 18 years of their life. So immigration actually is in favour of the British-born taxpayer. But it's interesting that you believe the opposite. Why do you think that is?
When I say immigration, I mean the votes. That's what I'm referring to. So when they come over
you mean
here,
asylum seekers? So tens of thousands of people a year making a more or less negligible dent in the national budget, and of course they're desperate to work and they're prevented from doing so by law. So they're a very odd target to pick on when you're trying, but a very popular one, of course, because of the effort.
A very popular one. Okay, so maybe one.
But completely false and completely bogus, and of course it appeals to possibly some of our worst impulses to feel resentful about people who are risking their lives in pursuit of safety when you're thinking about your own taxes.
So, to your point, it is a contributor, albeit it may be a minor. When you look at...
But it's the first one you chose. It's the first one you chose after the other myth of the great armies of people who are choosing to claim unemployment benefit and living a life of Riley instead of working. So proven myths there, which are your basic reasons, your first cited reasons for being resentful of paying your tax. When your dad was ill...
No, I think you put words that I'm not resentful of paying tax whatsoever.
Oh, good.
If there was a need to increase taxes, absolutely,
well, there clearly is.
I would be...
There clearly is a need. You've seen the state of the prisons, you've seen the state of the court services, you've seen the state of the hospitals, you've seen the state of the schools. Our army is the smallest it's been since the Napoleonic Wars. Our police force is on its knees. The probation service is hemorrhaging people. Public servants haven't had real terms pay rises since the Tories got in. Nurses had to take industrial action to get a decent settlement. So did doctors.
Can I finish?
Well, no, we're having a conversation. You say things and I point out that they're not necessarily correct.
So you're telling me things that we all know.
Right.
And yes, I'd be more than happy to pay a larger proportion of my salary as taxes if there were some level of assurance, and I know it's hard to quantify,
yes,
some level of assurance that things would improve. But I do think perhaps...
But they always do, Claire. They always do.
But a starting point could be address some of the low-hanging fruit. OK, where is there perhaps mismanagement? Where is some of that existing money hemorrhaging? I have a very close family member.
Oh.
There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be out working.
And how much do they get? How much do they make?
Oh, well, they're on this enhanced sickness benefit.
And what does that mean?
Well, from what I can gather, it's a £500 a month minimum. Then the rent paid, then the council tax paid, and there's a staggering amount. And
why haven't you reported them?
It's so if they go through an assessment with a psychiatrist, and they're deemed as not fit for work,
yes,
there's
but
nothing
you know better.
Well,
just run me through your psychiatric training while you're here, Claire.
Well, I know this certain individual.
But this is your relative. This is your relative. So your relative is the problem. Have they never worked? Have they never paid in? Did their parents pay in? Did their parents pay into the system?
Yes.
Do their children? Are their children likely to pay into the system? See, when I pay my tax, I'm confident, for now at least, at this stage in my life, that I'm probably not going to need psychiatric assessment on the NHS. But my God, I want the people who need it to get it. Why don't you?
So why don't I what?
Why don't you want people who need psychiatric help to get it?
I'm talking about the people. As you will know, James, it's a very naive view to suggest that there's people out there...
No, all I ever hear is people who know someone who doesn't need it. And then when I ask whether they've been assessed by professionals who know better than amateurs, the answer is usually, yes, they have, but I'm still resentful of it.
All right, then. OK, so let me just...
What do you think the percentage of claims for benefit is that is found to be fraudulent in this country? You must know.
I don't know that.
0.7%.
And is that? Do you think that could be reflective of the amount that's investigated?
No, of course not. They put enormous amounts of effort into trying to track down benefit fraud, into trying to track down overpayments, and no effort whatsoever into trying to track down underpayment. Do you know why, Claire?
Why is that?
Because of people like you.
Why is that?
Because of people like you.
Well, elaborate.
Well, you start with the opinions you've got that everyone's swinging the lead and taking the mickey, and right wing. Oh, no, forgive me, just your relative. Your relative. Well, no, you did come on and say loads of people are choosing through choice. You did say that,
I did.
And yet it's 0.7% that's benefit fraud.
Well, and
the only example you've got is your relative, whose psychiatric assessment you query with absolutely no qualifications whatsoever.
Well,
and that's why you've got, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've rung in to explain why people have a problem with paying tax, and all you've done is cite falsehoods, cliches, and unpleasantness with regard to your own relative.
So I haven't said that people don't want to pay tax and I don't want to pay tax. If you recall, I said I personally would be happy to increase mine. However, I think it could be a two-prong approach.
No, you gave me the reasons why you're not in that place yet. And I listened very carefully.
What do you mean? Can you elaborate?
Yes, of course I can. You gave me the reasons why you're not in the place at the moment where you would be happy paying. And also, I don't know that income tax is what we're talking about today. It's capital gains tax. But that was the list of things you gave me were the reasons why you're not currently in a place where you would want to pay more tax.
So I don't recall saying I wouldn't feel comfortable paying tax. I said I would.
Okay.
I said, although I do think that the current pot, I mean, when you look at the likes of, for reasons why I think we genuinely do need to pay more into the pot.
Yes.
My father, he recently nursed him to his death. Parkinson's.
Yes.
There was an absolute ton of money thrown at my father. He's underweight. He needs a dietitian. His speech isn't very good. He needs speech and language. He needs this, he needs that.
Yes.
All this money has got to come from somewhere.
Well, exactly.
And so it's got to come out of the public purse.
Yes.
And for reasons like that, people are living longer. If people are living, not dying at 65 and now dying at 85. The pension contributions are going to be far greater. Keeping them alive and healthy and giving them a quality
So we
of
all
life.
need to pay more tax because
Exactly.
of people like your dad.
Exactly so.
So why were we talking about small boats 10 minutes ago?
Because I do feel there is a whole host that I don't feel it's one silver bullet.
Do you see how it works?
Do I see how what works?
Because you're talking about the small boats. The politicians get away with not looking after your dad.
I disagree there because my father was well looked after.
Yeah, but the direction of traffic, you've got Robert Jenrick talking about tax cuts at the moment. So what happens to people like your dad if there's even less money going in to the public pot? Answer, we'll just deal with the immigrants and there'll be lots of money left for the rest of us. And that creates the kind of problems that many families are already facing in this country.
So as I kept trying to
Or they won't get. I'm very, very, very late for the news, Claire. But they won't get the psychiatric treatment that they need. They won't get the psychiatric assessment that they need. They won't get the police turning up when they dial 999. They won't get an ambulance when they want one. They won't feel safe with regard to our military presence in other parts of the world. They won't feel safe with regard to the prisons, or they won't get a criminal actually tried in court if they become a victim of crime. So all of the reasons why we need more tax.
Yes.
Don't get undermined by a few thousand people trying to come here largely to work in small boats across the English Channel, do they? Or by your relative who you think is lying about their mental health.
So, again, I've said 4 times now before you keep interrupting me.
Well, I'm not really. I'm listening to everything you say and responding very politely.
I don't feel there's a silver bullet in saying, if we address this, if we do this or do that, everything's going to be fine.
No one is suggesting that. What I was trying to work out today is why, when it is obvious that we should be raising more money to look after people like your dad, some people who can see that very, very clearly are still resistant to the idea. And I'm really grateful to you for answering those questions. Good Lord, it's 10:37. Thomas Watts has your headlines. 20 minutes to 11 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I suppose, in a sense, the reason why honest Bob Jenrick was so keen to paint over the pictures of Mickey Mouse in that asylum processing centre for unaccompanied children was because of some of the impulses that are carefully nurtured by our media. The idea that these people are taking from us, that they are less deserving than we are. Some of the most desperate people on the planet, if they wash up on our shores, they get too much. It's an extraordinary position to find yourself in, but a perfectly comprehensible one. I wonder if Kevin in Norwich portrays the same idea from the other end of the political spectrum when he says people don't want to pay more tax because they know the fools at the top will just waste, squander or pocket any extra that they get. I find that equally dangerous. An imperfect system is not grounds for abolition. And if you want to improve, and that list I did with Claire a minute ago was straight off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more, But you want to improve the state of our courts. You want to improve the state of our prisons. You want to improve, and certainly if you want to get fewer people in prison through a process of rehabilitation, you're going to need money. You want to shorten waiting lists, you're going to need money. You want to improve the NHS, you're going to need money. You want to have a happy workforce of doctors and nurses, you're going to need money. You want to have a welfare state that catches people when they fall or provides them with enough money when they're pensioners, you're going to need money. All of these things, you're going to need money. Why don't you want to pay more money? Because of asylum seekers, James. And my cousin who's swinging the lead. It's genius. The way they've pulled this off. There's nothing wrong with the people that believe this. It's just that what they believe is wrong. And it's quite easy to demonstrate it. The only bit I don't get is the fury that you sometimes encounter when you point it out, as if people are happier in ignorance, belligerent ignorance, than they are in full knowledge of the imperfect system that we inhabit. Philip is in Royal, it says here, Royal Leamington Spa. Philip, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Yes, a few things, really. I suppose a bit of background. I'm just retired from HMRC after 48 years.
Gosh,
and
that's a shift, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a shift, yes. Full-time as well. None of this part-time business like some of my colleagues. So one of the things that really caught my ears was, I didn't catch the beginning of the clip on Alan Sugar paying his £56 million.
Yeah.
So how do you think someone like Alan Sugar would fare if he wasn't living in a civilized country where people were allowed to earn a crust and to spend the money that they earn in the way that generates...
Well, exactly. Alan Sugar wasn't complaining. He was taking pride in how much he pays, and I'm wondering why more of us who pay a fraction of what he pays don't feel a similar impulse, Philip.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And really, that's one of the points I wanted to make, is that these people who do complain, business people who pay a lot of tax, and they do, they don't consider the fact that they should be, maybe privilege is the wrong word, but that they're in a country that allows them to generate the funds and the income that makes them make the profits that they have, that allows them to pay these taxes. I mean, we had, if you recall, I don't want to sound like Wolfie from Tooting here.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with sounding like Wolfie from Citizen Smith, one of the greatest creations of all time. But I know what you mean. A little naive, shall we say?
Yes. So, I mean, one of the psychological kind of approaches to drink and driving back in the 70s and 80s, 70s maybe, where people were not ashamed to say they were going to have a few drinks and then drive. And that cultural shift to now, where you go into the pub and you see people who are, well, I can't drink and drive, it's the right thing to do. There's been a change in the public psyche.
Yes.
We should really do that with taxes, because as you rightly pointed out, we need these funds to run the country. And I don't know why the government doesn't spend more time and energy in trying to change that culture.
Well, you know why a Tory government doesn't. But the question of why a Labour government doesn't is probably a little premature. Have you noticed much ebb and flow, much wax and wane in this field over the course of that 48 years? I mean, has it always been so clear that people are not...
It's difficult, James, because it's difficult because we with the advent of new technologies, computers especially, we were able to close that tax gap significantly.
Right.
The risk assessment of tax cases is automated. I mean, and with AI now coming on, that's going to improve things even further. I mean, I'm not speaking I can't speak officially because I'm not.
No, I understand. I'm just interested in perception, and whether or not in the 1950s, for example, I know that's before your time, but whether or not it was as easy to persuade people to act or to feel against their own interests by...
I think you hit on something there, because also we have a diversified population now, and I know that, for instance, if you look at my Sicilian background,
oh gosh,
you look at Sicily, the people there have been kind of inhabited by all manner of invaders. There's an innate distrust of government and any official.
Yeah.
So that is in the psyche that people.
Well, it is in Sicily, but it shouldn't be here. I mean, it really shouldn't be here, for good or for ill. We've never had a successful revolution. The only one we ever had got reversed a few years later, and stability has been prioritised over almost everything else. But I take your point. There is a scepticism there. There is a sort of air of negativity. And yet I'm slightly haunted by Claire's call, because, of course, in order to look after your dad in the same way that her dad was looked after, we need to address the demographic time bomb that's ticking in this country, which is low birth rate and ageing population. And the only way you address that is through immigration. Literally, another sort of obvious, something that all politicians know in private but compete to pretend they don't understand in public. And although the asylum seekers in small boats crossing the channel have become the focal point of the immigration debate, of course, it usually speaks to a broader antipathy towards immigration in general. And yet, who the hell is going to not only pay the tax that looks after our elderly and sick in generations to come, but also, of course, look after them, the actual personnel to do the looking after? If we continue this mad Dutch auction on who can have the most negative attitude to immigrate, it's all linked, isn't it? Crikey. Thank you, Philip. And thank you for your service, sir, as well, actually. I bet people that work for the Inland Revenue don't hear that very often, but we'd be, even however much trouble we might be in as a country, we'd be in a hell of a lot more if the Inland Revenue wasn't functioning. It's 10:48. No one mentioned the PPE scandal, of course, but Mohit has. And that's a viable objection to paying more tax, because you don't want to buy Michelle Mone another yacht. But I think that's an anomalous example, and of course it's a previous administration. And speaking of previous administrations, do you know, I just want to take a moment to praise my colleagues. I don't know whether you realise who was first with the news that Sue Gray was to part company with Keir Starmer, but it was LBC. It was our political team and their colleagues, Natasha Clark and Aggie Chambray and others, who were responsible for dragging the likes of Laura Koonsberg and Chris Mason and Robert Peston away from their Yorkshire puddings on Sunday lunchtime, because we had, with our tiny, tiny team, we had absolutely led the news agenda. And it is to Henry Riley that we turn next, who has done exactly the same thing today. And naturally a very modest individual, as you have no doubt gleaned over the years, and therefore someone who won't be entirely comfortable with me describing this as an absolutely see-it-from-space-sized scoop. What have you done?
Thank you very much, James. This is regarding HS2, which, of course, has been a long-running sore in British politics. It was announced back in 2009 by Gordon Brown's government. It's been sort of dragging on for the last 15 years. And as you know, last year at the Conservative Party conference, we had a major announcement on it when Rishi Sunak stood up in front of activists and said that he was scrapping phase 2 of HS2. Now, what that would mean is that HS2 would run from likely Old Oak Common in West London to Birmingham. And the hope with some of his advisors, I've been told, was it would be almost like a tube line between Old Oak Common and Birmingham. That obviously and understandably upset many people who were expecting it to run to Crewe and beyond that to Manchester. And what I have found out this morning, James, and been reporting from sources in HS2, sources within government, is that the government is set to partially reverse that and run HS2 beyond Birmingham after all. So HS2 will run from London to Birmingham to Crewe, reversing that decision from Rishi Sunak. Also, crucially, James, restoring that London Euston branch, because there was a lot of concern that Old Oak Common perhaps wasn't the best destination to do this from. London Euston's a station that's had a lot of criticism, but is undoubtedly the travel hub, being in central London. It also happens to be the constituency of Sir Keir Starmer, so I suppose he has a personal interest in that as well. Now, insiders told me that the Prime Minister held private discussions specifically on HS2 at last month's Labour Party conference, and that there was a formal announcement planned on this in the new year. I've been told from Downing Street Department of Transport, I was told that they were making the case to the Treasury on this because they see very much a cost benefit in restoring phase 2A. Indeed, it's cross-party in many ways. Speaking with LBC this morning, this was the former West Midlands Mayor, Conservative, Andy Street.
If it does go ahead, it really is excellent news, because the underlying point here is Britain needs this new infrastructure, and actually to have built HS2 just between Old Oak Common and Birmingham really was not going to achieve very much. To connect it to Euston, connect it to Crewe, and then hopefully in the future onto Manchester, it means we do actually get something that's fit for the century ahead. We made that argument last year. The Prime Minister at the time, Rishi Sunak, did not agree with myself, so Andy Burnham and I chose to turn to the private sector to actually show this could be done at less cost, delivered more quickly. That report went into government, and I can only assume that the government have looked at that and said, yep, that argument is right. It's not dark art. This is actually common sense and economics winning through.
Now, I haven't had it directly confirmed for the government, James, but what Andy Street was suggesting, he did this joint report with Andy Burnham, cross-party, and they looked at potential cost savings that could be made, for example, with private investment, making the cost a lot lower than it could have been 5 billion. They estimate it could be around 3.5 billion with some of that private investment. Crucially as well, Henry Murison, who's chair of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, he said to LBC this morning that he'd been hearing similar murmurings about the programme.
I'm very positive about Henry's report, and it follows some similar murmurings that were reported in the Times last week. But they were probably less specific than what Henry seems to have picked up. If this is indeed true, it's brilliant news. It means higher productivity. So the bit that everyone always forgets is that we are going to build eventually a new line across the Pennines, but that is built using part of what was originally HS2. We've just last year rebranded it. So a very important bit of connectivity between Manchester Airport and Manchester that will let trains get from where I'm sitting here in Bradford across the Pennines to Liverpool, but it would also allow people in Leeds and the North East, as well as where I'm sitting, to get to Birmingham if you build that bit between Crewe and Birmingham and eventually build a little bit more up towards Manchester Airport.
Now, I do have to say the Department for Transport are playing this down. They're saying, we've always said we won't be taking plans for HS2 Phase 2 back off the shelf. They said the Conservatives took a wrecking ball to the project, allowed the cost to spiral directly out of control. We're committed to delivering better rail connectivity across the north, as set out in our manifesto. Transport is an essential part of the government's mission to rebuild Britain and grow our economy. So, in terms of physically naming it as HS2 Phase A, the government...
You very kind. You didn't say they said through gritted teeth.
Yeah, possibly.
Because I think we can probably agree, well, I can certainly say, I don't know whether you're allowed to agree with me, that they would have been hoping to announce this in rather more fanfarous circumstances, i.e. in the budget, perhaps?
Well, so what I've been told on that, James, is London Euston, the hope was that would be announced in the budget, because that would directly contradict Rishi Sunak and make that clear turn. And then this was actually further down the track, if you were. I know, here a week. And that would be potentially in the new year. So,
Gosh,
not
you've
finalised.
Really shot their fox a bit, albeit that it's good news for the country and therefore... better out than in.
Yeah, and I think you heard Andy Street then. We've been speaking with people in Crewe this morning to get their reaction, and that there is a sense from people who are living in the north, quote unquote, that this is really welcome news, and that perhaps these changes that were made by Rishi Sunak, they're pleased that they haven't been made permanent.
It ties in a little bit with the conversation we've been having about tax in the rest of this hour of the programme as well, because this is enormous public expenditure on something to the proven benefit of the population. But as I suggested a moment ago, I'm not sure the government were quite ready for this to see the light of day on the 17th of October 2024. Well done. Sarah wants to just check something. Is that all right?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, James. Am I correct in thinking Henry Riley was Nick Abbott's glamorous assistant for a while?
Wow. Yeah, 5 years ago. 4 or 5 years ago, I was answering the phone to Nick Abbott. Absolutely.
There it is. Look at that for a career arc. Henry Riley with the biggest story of the day so far in political circles, and one which will not enrage, but certainly mildly irritate the government, because they would have wanted to be in control of the release of that story themselves. But as an LBC listener, guess what? Just as with Sue Gray's departure from Keir Starmer's inner circle, as an LBC listener, you got the news first. I'll break a story one day. It's coming up to 10:59. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to squeeze in Janice, who's in Cottingham in East Yorkshire, just for a little bit of light and shade. Janice, what have you been waiting to tell us?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Janice.
Yes, it was just about the tax issue. My personal view is I would be happy, even though I'm retired, to pay more tax. I have never objected to paying higher tax. To be fair, I've been a higher earner.
Yes.
And my view is that we are supposed to be here to help those less fortunate. I came from a family that had nothing, and I went to a grammar school. I didn't go to university, but I ended up in a very well-paid position. I was able to build a really good pension. That is not the case for the majority of people.
No, and we weren't even supposed to be talking about income tax today. The actual story is about capital gains tax, but I think inevitably the spotlight has sort of swung towards income tax, because the political discourse, the more you think about it, the more bonkers it becomes. You've still got one of the Tory leadership contenders campaigning on a promise to cut taxes, while all of the news discourse is about the parlous state of all the things that taxes pay for. It's quite bizarre, isn't it, when you think about it?
It's totally ridiculous. I mean, I think we just need a total tax reform.
Yeah.
My view is that maybe we should raise the level of where you start paying tax to, say, ballpark figure, just off the top of my head, say £20,000.
Sure, yeah. So and then after that, I mean, tell me one thing, and then after that, you have I'm just hurrying because of the time.
Yeah.
Why don't you feel that impulse that other people feel? Do you think? Why don't you? And I feel it sometimes. I'm not going to lie to you, Janice. I sort of think, well, it'd be nice to have a house by the seaside as well as my house in London. Why don't you have that? Why do you feel you've got enough when some people, like Elon Musk, who's a bit richer than you and me put together, he will never feel like he's got enough? It's weird, isn't it?
It is. And you know, the one thing now you'd mentioned him, maybe I'm an idealist, James, I don't know, but one of the things I always think is the Elon Musks of this world. I mean, great, he's done that with a rocket. What does that do for this planet? And can you imagine the legacy he and of his ilk would leave if they actually pulled together and decided that they would provide
lift up the lowest.
absolutely nations in Africa to have their own water systems.
Well, do you know what? I mean, you make a brilliant point, because people like George Soros and Bill Gates have tried to do things like that, and look at how they get treated by right-wing media, and then of course, by weird conspiracy theorists, both on and offline. It's almost as if the people that control the flow of information want to demonize and denigrate the people who want to use their epic wealth to do good. Maybe they just make the others feel bad. Thank you, Janice. What a lovely call to end that conversation with. It's 11:01. 5 minutes after 11 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC as we return our attention to one of the subjects I consider to be among the most important that we could ever discuss together. And we discuss it a lot, and we will continue to discuss it a lot, and I will, I think, forever find it fascinating. And I've bored you to tears before with some of the reasons why I perhaps find it even more fascinating than other people do. But I shall indulge myself once again very briefly, because the answer is the path not taken. The answer is the sliding door. The answer is the you'd be if you'd had different starts, if you'd had different origin experiences. Origin stories, that's what they say, isn't it, in the superhero language? Your origin story. If you had a different origin story, who would you be today? Look, it's unlikely you'd be Spider-Man. I fully accept that. But if you had a completely different origin story, who would you be today? You know? Talked about Alan Sugar in the first hour. He's somebody who almost defies the origin story. We really get excited about people who come from very humble stock and manage to scale the dizziest heights of material wealth or commercial success. It's not an entirely healthy impulse. Arguably, society should value different contributors more than material contributors. But generally speaking, we recognize, or the reason why, there you go, the reason why we focus so much on rags to riches stories is because they are man bites dog territory. This is one of the weirdest things about inequality, which, as you know, I think about a lot. And we're about to look at in a slightly different way shortly, after some fascinating research was published today. The example of a rags to rich story is held up as proof that the system works and is fair, when in fact it's proof of the exact opposite, isn't it? Because if everybody was starting on an equal starting line, then the idea that the people who are currently leading the rat race would be leading, if they hadn't had huge head starts through family or education or simple finance, there's no way they'd be leading. So we fetishize the rags to riches story, or we're encouraged to fetishize the rags to riches story, bizarrely as a way of perpetuating the myth that we live in a meritocracy or that our system is fair. Who else, off the top of your head, who are the big classic, outside showbiz? Because showbiz is a different example. But in the world of business, I think, didn't Elon Musk's dad own an emerald mine in South Africa? Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that I could ever have been with a different origin story as rich as Elon Musk. But if my dad had owned an emerald mine, I'd be richer than I am now. Of this I am certain. So the sort of classic exceptions that prove rules, as opposed to citing them of examples of how ridiculous it is. So how many people did Alan Sugar grow up with that if they'd had a fairer crack of the whip, if they'd gone, for example, to the school that Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Cameron, Rory Stewart, George Orwell attended, if you took 100 kids from... And they always talk about markets. They always talk about people starting on a market store. You took 100 kids from Alan Sugar's school when he was 15, right, and sent them all to Eton for the sixth form. How many of them would be today where they are now? How many of them would be further down the road of... I'm not suggesting for a minute that wealth is the only mark of success, but the rags to riches story is proof that our system is unfair, not proof that our system is fair. I tread a little carefully on this, but as I get older and I bump into lads that I was at school with, prep school and public school, and I clock where they've gone and what they've done in life. And I can remember, because I've got a weird memory like that. I remember roughly, well, actually not weird at all, because they used to sit us in class according to our academic achievement. So the cleverer you were, the further to the back of the room that you sat, unless you were clever and naughty, in which case you'd be moved to the front of the room, even though you'd earned in the quarterly reports the right to sit at the back. It's not that I'm still smarting about that or anything, but I can close my eyes now. I can tell you where Simpkins Minor was sitting, and roughly for an entire 5-year period, that means that Simpkins Minor, in a class with 20 kids in it, was in the bottom 5. And I'll bump into him now, and there's every chance he'll be a GP. He'll be a doctor or a lawyer or has worked in the city, and that's blooming marvellous. But there was no particular difficulty to get into that school. There was no particularly high academic bar that you had to clear in order to get into the school. You take 20 kids, you grade them according to intelligence, and at a school like mine, if you were the 19th or the 20th in that 20, there was almost no career path that was closed to you. And I find that extraordinary now as I get older. I began to find it extraordinary around the time that I did my first shifts in a restaurant in Kidderminster. Do you know, I did a shift in a restaurant in Kidderminster. I immediately became working class. I'm joking. I'm not Kemi Badenoch. I did my first shifts, and for the first time I met people my own age who were not on the conveyor belt that I thought everybody else was on. I met people my own age who had left school and were not going to go on to further education. I met people my own age who had a completely different expectation of the road ahead than I had. Where would Donald Trump be today if he had been born in relative poverty? So where would the person born in relative poverty be if they were as clever as the cleverest person in their class? Well, they were. Which is why this research that I came across today was so fascinating to me. You're right, it is Trading Places. Mick says, I'm going to go and watch it again. Trading Places is the distillation. I don't know if you've ever seen that film. I haven't watched it for years, but for a long time it was one of my all-time favourite films. Not particularly because it spoke to my politics or my philosophical beliefs, but because it's just so funny. Eddie Murphy in his pomp must be one of the funniest people ever to walk the earth. And the supporting cast was absolutely superb. The Winthrops, Dan Aykroyd. Just a beautiful film. Absolutely perfect film. I got legs! And it does precisely that. But it swaps people out late in life. It takes a sort of WASP, posh city trader, swaps him out with so you've got a white Anglo-Saxon patrician, and they simply swap him with a hustling black kind of street artist, and Eddie Murphy's character ends up hitting jackpots that you would have previously believed could only be hit by people who'd had the background of Dan Aykroyd's character. You're absolutely... Jamie Lee Curtis as well. Behave yourself, Matt. The number of us that possibly go through life without ever having any idea of what life's like on the other bus, what life's like on the other coach, is again, I think, a large part of why our system is so unfair. Fetishization of rags to riches stories. Rags to riches is man bites dog. That's why it's news. Dog bites man, rich people stay rich. Wealth is inherited. Privilege is passed on. Dog bites man is not news. And yet it consigns millions and millions and millions of people to lives not as, I don't want to say successful, but you know what I'm talking about. It locks doors. In fact, it doesn't lock doors. It bricks over doorways. You didn't even know there was a door there. Do you know what they call it in this fascinating research that I've come across this morning? They call it assumed knowledge in youth transitions from education to employment. Unspoken, untaught information that helps young people, based on socioeconomic background, get ahead. It's an extraordinary piece of work, looking at the way in which what they have called assumed knowledge hinders social mobility. It's not about academic abilities. That might be part of it, but it's highly unlikely that academic ability is well, we know it's not tracked tightly to socioeconomic status. Assumed knowledge is the unspoken, untaught knowledge crucial for successfully transitioning into adulthood. They use the word successfully. So education system, career planning, job applications, work culture, high culture and confidence. They've interviewed 150 young people for that stage. The next stage, 1,000 young people aged between 15 to 21 had their awareness of things gauged and measured, and the results are extraordinary. Only 25% of 15 to 21-year-olds could, I beg your pardon, a quarter of 15 to 21-year-olds could not tell you that the University of Cambridge was the best university on a list of universities. Move that into the number of kids on free school meals, and 35% of them didn't know that. 36 among children whose parents didn't attend university. 48% of young people were unaware that graduates earn more than non-graduates. Statistically, there are exceptions. Don't at me, you know that. 48% don't realise that your earning potential improves according to your degree. And if you break that down into people whose parents, I beg your pardon, into children who were on school meals and children who were not, the children on school meals are measurably less likely to know that graduates earn more money. 95% of 15 to 18-year-olds who have a parent or guardian with a postgraduate degree ask their friends or family for advice. If you're on free school meals, the figure plummets to 67%. So it's something that we talk about a lot, but we never get the language, do we? But I like the phrase assumed knowledge. The stuff you didn't know was knowledge. The stuff you thought that everybody knew. Imagine you're 15, you want to be a lawyer because you've watched something on telly. And you say to your dad, I'd quite like to be a lawyer. And your dad says, well, I don't know any law. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start. Whereas you come from a background like mine, you say to your dad, I'd quite like to be a lawyer. And he says, oh, well, you can have a chat with my mate John. He's a lawyer. Do you see what I mean? I'd like to go to university. Of course you do. Everybody goes to university. Do you earn more money? Yes, of course you do. So when did you realise that some people had this and some people didn't? And I don't mind whether you are on, well, I'd say I don't mind. I want to speak to people on both sides of this divide. The moment you realised that what you thought was innate and what you thought was knowledge was actually learned. It was gifted to you. Privilege, actually. People don't like being told they're privileged. It's another weird one. It's not unlike the tax conversation. But when you and also the other side of it, when did you, for a lot of people, after Tony Blair's improvements to the education system, a lot of people arrived at university to realise that they'd been living in parallel universes for their entire life. And you arrive at university with people from more privileged backgrounds, and you had no real idea about what those privileges were and what those privileges meant. And the opposite should have happened as well. The opposite did happen. But there's a tendency for denial. Nobody likes to be told that their achievements are based largely on privilege that has been gifted to them or bought for them by their parents. We like to feel that our achievements are our own. You get to university and you're up against someone who's 10 times cleverer than you but had worse A-level results because they'd been at a much worse school. It becomes hard to cling to those notions. So tell me about when you first came across it. Assumed knowledge, okay? The things that many of us take for granted without realising that many of us never know. I'll run through some more examples for you shortly, but if you want to ring in now and tell me, you know already exactly what I'm talking about. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Assumed knowledge. When you realise that we actually live in the same country, but in different universes. And it could have been quite early in life or it could have been quite late in life. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And be quick, because it's Mystery Hour at 12. It's another one, isn't it, where you wonder why we are resistant to things that are to our own benefit. Of course, if we all recognised how unfair the system is, we'd get closer towards wanting to improve the system. You know, think about your origin story. Think about your mum's origin story or your dad's origin story. If they'd been born with more privilege, where would they have ended up? And do you honestly think they would have ended up exactly where they ended up? And if the answer to that is no, I don't, James, I think they'd have ended up more, quotes, successful, end quotes, more comfortable, more privileged. The more privilege you're born with, the more privilege you end with. then the harder we should be working to make society fairer, because that way you ensure that the best people end up in the most important places. And yet here we are. It's the Social Market Foundation. My apologies, I should have mentioned that sooner. And phones are busy, but I do want to run through what the 5 domains of assumed knowledge are in a little more detail. So don't let me forget to do that. But let's go to Camden first. Laura is there. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Laura.
I was interested in what you had to say, because I'm kind
that's a
of
relief.
on both sides. My background is that both of my parents left school at 14, didn't have any professionals as friends or anything like that. They were market traders, basically, in Warsaw, would you believe? And
gosh.
I worked really hard at school. I don't know why. I think I was quite aware that I just wanted to get out of where I was.
Yeah.
And I managed to do well. I got into Oxford and I became a lawyer. And so I kind of, against what you were saying a bit before, I think I did it despite the fact that I didn't have access to that world at all.
Did you have a teacher? Yeah. Did you have a special teacher at all? Or did you really self-propel?
No, I had a couple of I was lucky. I was blessed to have a couple of teachers that really gave me this push.
Because that's part of it. In fact, I think I'm probably going to drop these assumed knowledge nuggets into conversations rather than just risk them out, because here's a big one: knowing the different educational pathways available and which would best suit you, knowledge to make informed educational choices, knowing the different subjects and qualifications on offer and how choices over which to study may impact your future pathways, and finally knowing how the university system works. So you might not have felt it, and by many measures you weren't, but those 4 things are privileges that a lot of people don't have.
Well, actually, and I should mention, I was state educated until I was fourth year, so year 10. And then I got a scholarship to a private school, which made the world of difference,
there it is.
Obviously.
There it is.
And that coupled with my actual self-determination, that's a given.
Of course. No one's going to take away your achievements. We're just going to come to a better understanding.
And I, as soon as I got to Oxford, I was acutely aware of the difference between us and them, because I was surrounded by people in that former camp, where, Dad, I want to be a lawyer, go and speak to John. I was surrounded by them. And I was acutely aware that I was from Birmingham. My parents were market trade. I didn't want to have anyone home ever. No. And I had to assume a different identity, which I'm quite ashamed of now. I used to say I was from Warwickshire instead of Birmingham, because I was so kind of ashamed in a way, And then post-university, what happened was, you leave and you start looking for jobs. And of course, all my friends that were kind of upper middle class or had these, they walked pretty much in, because not only did they have Oxford on their CV, but they had daddy's friends to help them. Whereas I didn't have that, but I still managed, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
And subsequent to that, my kids are now in a position where I'm in the previous camp where I do know lawyers and doctors, and so they can come to me and say, "Mummy, I want to be a da-da-da," and I'll say, "Fine." And in a way, it's kind of.
But you're the man bites dog example. How many people from your school ended up where you've ended up, educationally or professionally?
No,
from your original school.
Quite. Well, they haven't left Birmingham, really.
No. So, no, I mean, just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with Birmingham. Well, we'll be here all day, Laura. Thank God for HS2.
Well, and I was actually with loads of ample source at St Bennett's Hall, because I did theology, so there you go, and we were...
So Bennett's Hall is, I mean, this has gone very niche now, but that is that's where... If you were really, really desperate to go to Oxford, above all else, that you'd go to that because it was attached to the monastery, and you didn't actually have to reach the same... I hope I'm not doing a grave disservice to some of my old mates now, but you didn't have to actually do as well to get into St Bennett's Hall as you did into other colleges.
And that's the other thing that I noticed, is that once you get to the kind of rarefied halls of a place like Oxford as an institution, you do see that people have there, and it's probably changed, this was the late 90s, but were there not just because of their academic ability. There were definitely kind of other routes and ways in, including... and that was a shocker for me.
Well, not even academic ability, but academic achievement. So if it was academic achievement, we could point out the unfairness of education defining achievement as much as intelligence. But in fact, you're right. Someone with mediocre grades from a certain background could find their way in via loopholes and back doors that someone from a less privileged background would never, ever in 100 years. be aware of, even in some cases, once they'd arrived at the same university. So that you've given us education system. High culture is the fifth one, which is knowledge about certain cultural subjects such as art, sport, theatre and others, which is a sort of social facility, isn't it?
Well, this is it. Even going to evensong or music recitals, people would be tapping their foot or waving their hands around like they were a conductor, and they knew these songs. They'd grown up with these pieces. And I think the Archer's Omnibus song was about the closest I got to classical music. It was just the intense feeling of the difference, the chasm of culture.
It's incredible. And you have closed it. You have crossed it.
I've closed it now.
And your children are on the other side of it.
I know, and I don't quite know how to psychologically deal with that. My mum has mega issues with it, and sometimes, I've had an argument with her over and over about it, but she almost would be praised to shout at, and you'd be more proud of me if I was living in a high-rise carrying, shopping bags up instead of being a middle-class woman that I am now. And she admits
uncomfortable.
It.
She's a bit uncomfortable because she doesn't want her little girl speaking a language she doesn't understand, and that's natural and normal. But I bet you £1,000,000 she's incredibly proud of you. I bet you, Laura, that she tells her friends about all your achievements.
I hope so.
No, I bet you hard enough for she them, does. You know she does.
Yeah.
She might not. She might not tell you, but she certainly tells all her friends. 28 minutes after 11 is the time, because it does. That you're talking. She describes a chasm. Her children are on the other side of it from the one she was on, but she's crossed it, and her mum and dad are still back there. That's not something I have any experience of, but it is part of the reason why people perhaps are reluctant to move. A lot of people come back from university in their first year because of some of the things that Laura describes, and they are much more likely to be from a background like hers than a background like mine. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. Lindsay is in Southend-on-Sea. Lindsay, what would you like to say?
Hi, I think I'm probably quite similar to your last caller, actually, James. In that my parents both left school at 16. They went in. No one from my family had been to university, and I came from a little town in the middle of nowhere in Shropshire, which I love very much, but it's tiny.
We're all going to get exiled from the Midlands at the end of this conversation, all three of us, aren't we?
And the people, there wasn't an assumption that people would go to university, but I went through school and I got decent grades. And I just remember that moment where I looked at that university brochure for Cambridge.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I don't understand these colleges. How do you apply to this university? And I still got good grades. I ended up at University College London, which obviously was Russell Group. I had no idea. I just wanted to go to London.
Yeah.
I think the way you do when you're like 18 and it's a million miles from where you are.
Sure.
And then I said to my boyfriend, who had applied at the time, I didn't know. And he was like, oh, well, you should have gone to this college because of blah, blah, blah. Because they've had lessons about how to apply to Cambridge and what college
we
to
did
go
that
to,
at my school. I'd had a friend who was the son of a Conservative MP, and they said, don't apply to Bailey or whatever you do.
And it's just this colour of the world that suddenly opened up to me where I was like, how is anyone else meant to find that out when you look at the brochure and it doesn't have any of that information?
Can we think of less rarefied examples? Because do you see what I mean? Because Oxford and Cambridge colleges, it's the perfect example, but even at UCL that you'd have encountered people who spoke a language, a social language that you'd never really learned to speak before.
And I lost my regional accent on purpose by the end of my first year, because I just didn't sound like everybody else around me. Very much like your last caller, like rarefied kind of people whose parents bought them flats in London.
Yeah. So
and that sort of stuff when I'm living. Yeah,
that's the obvious stuff, isn't it? The money, the finance, and also that they, of course, could live in the flat that their parents had bought for them when they were trying to get into the professions that everybody wanted to get in on. So even those privileged enough to have had the degree education have another level of hierarchy, because some of us
able to work in the media.
Bingo. Some of us needed to go out to work to pay our bills, and some of us could sit and wait.
I worked in pubs all the way through university.
I was measuring inside legs, mate. I can still size up a man from 100 yards away. Who was I reading about the other day who'd also worked? It was a journalist in the Financial Times who'd worked in Peter Jones as a student, and he can still say 44 regular, 36 inside leg, 42 long. Thank you, Lindsay. 11:31 is the time. So that's two examples of crossing the Rubicon, as it were. What about the other way around? What about when you realised how lucky you were? for me, oddly, it was when I was doing the jobs that Lindsay and I both did, because albeit that my most privileged friends didn't need to do those jobs, I suddenly found myself knocking about with people who were obviously just as bright and as sparky as I was, but who had never been aware of some of the doors that I'd already passed through. And they didn't just choose not to go through them, they never saw the doors. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 25 minutes to 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation is important and fascinating. A conversation about the things that you don't know and until you do know, and sometimes you never know. So I've run through the 4 elements of the education system that can be filed under assumed knowledge, i.e. the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots are often not aware of what they have, and the haves are often not aware of what they do have. Knowledge to set and achieve career goals, knowing what career options are possible for you and being able to make informed decisions on which to pursue, knowing what different careers require in terms of qualifications and experiences, knowing the different characteristics of different careers, such as salaries, work-life balance and employee satisfaction. And talking to Lindsay a moment ago, I am not embarrassed to tell you that I did not realise that people did not know this stuff until I started working in the jobs that I felt at the time would be the jobs that I did until I got the jobs that I wanted. No guarantee, of course, that I'd end up getting the jobs that I wanted, but these were the jobs that I did until I did. And the reason why I had a different concept in my mind of career goals was because I knew all of that stuff. I knew what options were possible. I knew how to make informed decisions on which to pursue, no guarantee of getting there, but decisions on which to pursue, knowing what different careers require in terms of qualifications and experiences, knowing the different characteristics of different careers. All of that. When did you realise you had it? Or, conversely, when did you realise you didn't? Andy is in Reading. Andy, what would you like to say?
Yeah, thank you very much, James. So my privilege stems from the commitment of my father to be a good father to me. I turned up, we used to write what's called Box 10. It was a statement when you applied for universities.
Yeah.
And I went for my interviews at several different universities, and they all read my personal statement. I was applying for medicine.
Gosh.
And bar none of them, they all said, gosh, look at your work experience. Gosh, look at what you've done. Gosh, you really want to be a doctor. Gosh, that's fantastic. And I suddenly realised that situation I was given, that head foot in an interview, was because of my parents who had helped me go down to my local GP. Or could he follow you? Or if once I got my foot in the door, I went to several other places and experiences. And I had that moment of sitting there realising that my parents had put me ahead of the game because of the opportunities they had afforded me.
And all perfectly natural.
Absolutely.
Opportunities, second nature to parents like yours and mine. But, of course, utterly alien to some of the other kids of your age at that time.
I was lucky enough to be born to parents that were going to invest in me to allow me to have the opportunity to be what I wanted to be.
Well, it's even more than that. You were lucky enough to be born to parents in that category who actually spoke the language that we're speaking now, because, you know, the parents of children who didn't have those advantages didn't love them any less or necessarily want any less for them. It would just be like asking them to turn up next Tuesday and speak Mandarin.
Absolutely. And my dad, as a Barnardo's boy who didn't have that background, was utterly committed to provide that to his children. And let me give you one more example. The day I left medical school and became a doctor, my dad, in the few months before, sat down, said, this is the wage you will earn. This is what you can afford to live on per month. This is your spare. This is what you can afford as a mortgage.
Gosh.
And I left medical school and moved straight into my own home in my early 20s. And he helped to find a broker that would lend to me on my future expected wage as a doctor.
Yeah.
And in my 10 further years of training as a junior doctor, I realised when I sold that property 10 years later, the amount I'd saved working for 10 years as a doctor was less than the increase in value of that property.
Isn't that
incredible? In other words, if I didn't buy that property at that point and work for 10 years, I would have been in the same situation without the backup and advice and
your dad,
of my parents.
That's extraordinary. And that's way beyond most people's experience, even those of us lucky enough to have some of the advantages that you've had. Of course, other people were born with many, many more advantages. They'd have been given a house by their parents or bought a house by their parents. But it was as if your dad had almost... it's almost like an air of the engineer about what you're describing, is that he worked out how the system operated and gave you the optimal inputs for the system.
I mean, he saw people who were in situations around and beyond him that had no basis to be there in terms of ability.
Yeah, I think that's a driving force for a certain type of dad. And even as they accept, perhaps, I don't want to get emotional now because my dad was exactly the same, even as they accept perhaps that in some ways it's too late for them to cross elements of that Rubicon. They might get halfway across it, but they know what they need to do to make sure that their children can get to the other side.
And this is the thing, because without getting overly emotional, when my dad passed, one of the last things he said was, "Did I do okay?" And his word of okay, I remember my mum reassuring him, was that he had done okay by his family and what that meant and how he had set us up in life. Mm. And having that power and that behind me, I'm now standing in a situation looking at the life I lead now, which wouldn't have been the fraction of what I would have had if it wasn't for that.
And what is the point of parenting if not to set your children up as well as you possibly can for the future? Not in exclusively material and professional terms, but just in terms of choices, options, understanding, knowing how things work and giving them what they need to navigate it. And of course, the people on the other side of the Rubicon, the people born on the other side of the Rubicon often have no idea that they speak Mandarin on Tuesdays. They have no idea that there is something exceptional about having the advice that they have taken for granted for all of their lives, having the access, having the contacts. God, that was beautiful, Andy. I tell you, you got me right in the feels with that one. My dad called it a golden ticket. That's why I have slightly conflicted attitudes to private education, because my dad gave me something he didn't have. He did great. He ended up on the Daily Telegraph, but he was surrounded by people who were posh and who would go a little further than him or sometimes go past him, not by dint of their journalistic ability, but by dint of their poshness. If you think I'm exaggerating, have a look at the Daily Telegraph today. And he wanted me to have that golden ticket. He understood that golden ticket. That's an advantage. Knowing it even exists is an advantage. So let's go on to job applications. Knowledge to identify and apply for jobs successfully. Lots of people don't have that. Knowing how to identify suitable roles based on your experiences and qualifications. Lots of people don't have that. Knowing how to write CVs and cover letters. Knowing how to act in and prepare for interviews. It's haves and have-nots. The people that have it didn't even realise that it was a plus, a bonus, an attribute, an advantage, a privilege. And they may never realise it until they meet people who don't have it. Steve's in Mansfield. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I mean, my background's slightly different. I would say that I come from a relatively privileged background, but my dad was a painter and decorator. I went to a secondary modern school, but I managed to go to university just through hard work, maybe a bit of brains here and there, but sure. I managed to get there. And it really struck home for me. My dad couldn't advise me, or neither parent could advise me really on university or job applications or anything because of the jobs they did. So I was sort of learning as I went along, but it really struck home for me the inequality when I was in my final year at university.
Yes.
Because somebody I was at university with was aristocratic, his family were in who's who, and he got a job with Barron's Bank just through virtue of his connections through his mum. He had applied for a job
You
there.
in your 50s?
Yes.
Yes. I think that's the last generation in which this would have worked. There was still little passports, still little routes, but that, I mean, for a start, the bank didn't exist for much longer, did it?
No.
But the am I getting mixed up? No, but that idea of being able to pull those sorts of strings, maybe for the upper echelons of the aristocracy, it would still apply, but it's nothing like what it used to be. And that's an example of what we're talking about. The very fact that I can make that observation about your age with the knowledge that I've got will sound like Mandarin to a normal person. It would sound like I've just done some sort of Jedi mind trick.
Yeah, but I always wonder, he got that job through this connection. Who was in a better position to do that job, could have done it more effectively from a background like my own, but didn't get that opportunity. And that's what's really sad. I've got my own kids. Yeah. They're both teenagers. And I do still think that inequality think a lot of it's gone, but I do think it's there still.
Well, of course, it's not as bad as it was. I think I was thinking of Lehman's rather than Barings in part of that, because I knew someone who went through exactly the same process but ended up in a slightly different bank at exactly the same point in my life. And even after coming out of the LSE, Steve, there was stuff I didn't know about applying for those kind of jobs, which generally involved people following their parents into that line of work, or people knowing people who knew people and people who wanted to do it. And so it's about a million different levels here, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. But at least my kids now have got the opportunity to have my knowledge, hopefully, if they want it.
Well, that's exactly what it is. So the 5 areas, the education system, the career planning, the job applications, the work culture and the high culture, parents can influence every single one of these attributes, and arguably are by far the most likely purveyors of these advantages, except that, of course, in some cases they provide these advantages by simply paying for a certain type of education. But look, I mean, work culture, knowledge to integrate into workplace culture and develop professionally, knowing what acting professionally in the workplace means in your specific industry, knowing how to form positive professional relationships and networks, and that this is important. How do you know all that stuff if you're coming from a standing start? From a standing start. How do you know all that stuff? Answer, you don't. But if you somehow manage to work it all out for yourself, you're extraordinary and exceptional. But you'll get held up by supporters of the system and supporters of the status quo as proof that the system is fair, which brings us back, oddly, in both hours, to Alan Sugar. Or whoever your rags to riches example is. Proof that the system is fair. This person came from nowhere and ended up with loads. Yeah, but hang on a minute, what about the people who were born with loads and ended up with loads more? That's not fair, is it? What if all the people who were born with loads had started where Alan Sugar started? Would they have ended up with what he ended up with? Or is he extraordinary and exceptional and proof that the status quo and the system are completely unfair? Weird, right? But once you can see it, you can never unsee it. It is 10 to 12. I'd like to do an unhinged headline during this part of the programme, Keith, if that's all right with you. I mean, it's an absolute humdinger, but as I said to you yesterday, it's getting a little bit tired, unhinged headline, because it's always the same person. And it's him again today. It's extraordinary, really. Talk about privilege. Imagine having described Liz Truss as an economic genius and still having a job as the editor of the Sunday Telegraph. Imagine another profession in which you could embarrass yourself so completely. And so comprehensively, and have your own professional fortunes touched not a jot. Same with the Mail, actually. Finally, a true Tory budget. All of these people who told you, shortly before your mortgages went through the roof, who told you this was brilliant, this was exactly what the country needed, this was works of staggering genius, and they haven't suffered at all. Oh, well, I presume their mortgages went up, but they haven't suffered at all. And I'm going to do a lovely missing word round for you as well. So we've got an unhinged headline before 12 o'clock. Mystery Hour's up next. This is a winner. This could be my favourite missing word ever. Boris Johnson's book, not on sale in Europe, due to blank. It's not cauliflower. Boris Johnson's book, not on sale in Europe, due to blank. It's only one word before anybody starts being rude. What do you think that one word is? How long can we do the cauliflower joke, do you think? Already a huge number of people listening to this programme will have no idea what the cauliflower joke is. But for those that do, it's a lovely joke. So just text me that on 84850 or WhatsApp it to 03456060973 is the number that you need. It just fascinates me. I think we've covered all of the 5 domains of assumed knowledge: education system, career planning, job applications and work culture. The 5th being high culture, which is a sort of, what would you call it? It's back to my dad's golden ticket, knowledge about certain cultural subjects such as art, sport, theatre and others. Do you know what the best indicator, perhaps, and again I'm generalising, but one of the best indicators of what you might call cultural confidence is admitting what you don't know. So you know enough to know that you know a lot, which means that you don't mind saying to somebody, do you know, I've got no idea about Shostakovich's backstory, or whatever it may be. So this week I've done quite a lot of accidental high cultural referencing because I've been to the theatre twice, and they're both quite difficult plays. historically. Coriolanus at the National Theatre, which is absolutely incredible, 4.5 stars. And then Oedipus at the Wyndhams with Mark Strong and Leslie Manville, which is one of the best things I've ever seen. But because of my education, I can talk knowledgeably about Coriolanus and about Oedipus, which is something to be proud of, perhaps, something to be treasured, but something that you acknowledge as privilege. And yet in some circles, of course, that would be taken for granted. And in other circles, it would make me stick out like a sore thumb. I always work on the principle that if everybody had the advantages that I'd have, they'd end up loving the things that I love as a consequence of the advantages that I have. So if me raving about Coriolanus makes you think, do you know what, I might go and see this. I've never heard of it before, but I'm going to go and have a look at it. Then it's worth me talking about it. Same with Oedipus. But I'll do the other stuff as well. I'm going to go and see Oliver during the Christmas holidays. I'm absolutely probably more excited about that than I am about any show that I've seen in a very long time. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner. And a TV show I'm watching at the moment, Slow Horses, which is based on books that I love, and I've probably had more gratitude from you for recommending the Slow Horses books by Mick Herron than I have for any of the other cultural references that I've inflicted on you over the years. So that's not high culture, that's medium culture, but knowledge there is assumed knowledge, a privilege that you don't know is a privilege, a have that you don't know you have until you meet people who haven't. Back to the phones. Louise is in Uxbridge. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello, Louise.
Thanks for taking my call. I work for a local authority working with children who are looked after by the local authority and care leavers. And it certainly wasn't until I started this job that I realised just how privileged and advantageous my upbringing was. It was only in the summer that there was a young person I was working with who was applying for a job, and we, were going through all of his application and things, and he sort of said to me, Louise, this date here, it says like the date that the application closes. He said, oh, does that mean the date that I have to wait until that date, until I can hear back from the job and whether I've got the job or not? And it just struck me. I remember going home to my husband and thinking, wow, I can't believe this young person, he's 17, he's a care leaver in under 12 months, and he's going out into the world not knowing the basics of how an employer...
Yeah, what an amazing example.
Down.
I mean, that's such a nuts and bolts example, isn't it, of what we're trying to describe.
And, often in my job I have conversations with the young people, and I think the dinner table conversation that I had when I was growing up is just not happening. This particular young person lives in what's called semi-independent placement.
Right.
And so he lives in a sort of group house with 3 or 4 other young people of a similar age, with staff in and out, in and out, in and out. There's no kind of formal dining table. There's, they cook for themselves and they go to their rooms and they eat and that sort of thing. And they don't have the like I said, the dinner table conversation that I had growing up, that I learned all of those soft skills about life and about what life is all about, and think a lot of them don't really know what careers there are out there.
Well, I'm going to read that. I mean, because some people, when I read through that list, may have thought, nah, come off it. Everybody knows that. Even people who don't think of themselves as privileged or haven't enjoyed, quotes, much, end quotes, privilege, would have thought knowledge to identify and apply for jobs successfully, James. How hard can that be? But you literally see a closing date and misunderstand what it means, potentially.
Exactly. And for him, his only experience of applying for anything was to college. And, of course, with college, it's very different. You make an application and you hear back pretty quickly about whether you've got a place at college or an interview at college and those sorts of things. So it just struck me as something that was really kind of upsetting in a way. That,
well, it is upsetting because it's as if he's hobbled. I mean, and you might be able to help him with that, but goodness knows what else is going to pop up in his...
Exactly. And of course, he's already at disadvantage because of his own upbringing and, the fact that he lives independently and has to do everything for himself, whereas his peers are being fed and clothed and washed for and all those sorts of things. And then have all these other things, these assumed knowledges that he doesn't know either.
Do you know, you've done something, you've helped me out as well, actually, because, you talk about kids in care. The actual research by the Social Market Foundation distinguished between kids on free school meals and kids not on free school meals, which is speaking to precisely the same social divide, isn't it? Albeit perhaps not quite as big, not quite as stark, and it literally states that disadvantaged children had lower levels of all types of assumed knowledge, but particularly suffered for their lack of understanding of how the education system works and how to plan and succeed in their chosen careers. So they wouldn't even know about some vocational routes. If you're parents didn't go to university, they're less likely to understand apprenticeships. If they're not even being raised by their parents, they're less likely to understand the people who are being raised by parents who didn't attend university.
Yeah, and likewise the other way as well, that often they only think that work is the only option for them. They only think that, low-level apprenticeships are for them. They don't realise that actually, with the grades that they're achieving, they could actually go to uni, and they could, you can open doors to these much bigger other fields that they didn't know about.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
You do the work of the angels. You really do. And just while you were speaking, the phrase that I should have had on the tip of my tongue at the top of this hour crystallised in my mind is that we live in the same country but different worlds, not different universes. That sounded wrong, but we live in the same country, but we live in different worlds. We live in the same society, but we live in different worlds, and it's not right and it's not fair. And it's certainly not the case that by finding someone who was born without any privilege whatsoever but has gone on to achieve great things, you can somehow prove that the system is right or that the system is fair. Thank you to Louise. Apologies to everyone waiting to contribute to that conversation. Elvin and Martin, Georgina, Ellen, Alex. But you won't be surprised to learn that I will be returning to similar territory, not least because I think it's among the most important territory that we can explore together meaningfully, but also because it is the subject matter precisely of a charity of which I'm trustee, which I keep meaning to tell you a little bit more about. But it won't be today because it's Thursday and it's 12 noon nearly, which means it's Mystery Hour.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 12, and Sean, welcome to my world. Sean has been in touch already to say, James, I had a great idea last night for a never-before-asked question. You know what's coming next, don't you? And I've blooming forgotten what it was. Just brilliant. Happens to me every single week. This week, oddly, I've remembered the question that I wanted to ask. But I didn't remember to give you the answer to the question of the missing word headline. I shall do that shortly, and it may be that the unhinged headline ship has sailed now. We don't normally interfere with Mystery Hour in such ways, but I will have to answer the question of what word was missing from this headline. This could be the first mystery of the day, actually, couldn't it? Boris Johnson's book not on sale in Europe due to blank. And I'll do that before 15:15. But Mystery Hour is upon us, and it falls to me to remind you how it works. You ring in with a question, and then someone else rings in with an answer. It is, I suppose, slightly more complicated than that. But not much. All you really need to know in addition to that is that there is a prize for my favourite contributor of the week, and that prize is a Mystery Hour board game, which you can get your grubby little hands on simply by being brilliant. My decision is final, and the full terms and conditions are at lbc.co.uk. If brilliance doesn't settle upon your scrawny shoulders this afternoon, then you can actually buy your own Mystery Hour board game, and you can find out more about that by going to mysteryhour.co.uk. So it kind of, I feel every sort of 6 or 7 weeks, I think I should explain this to people who've never heard it before. But it's not really any more complicated than what I said a moment ago. So the best thing to do is just sit and listen. You have to trust me that it reaches parts other radio cannot reach. I don't know why, I don't know how, but it does. I used to offer up a guarantee of a laugh out loud moment between now and 1 o'clock. I used to offer up guarantees of increasing the sum total of your knowledge between now and 1 o'clock. I've never had a single complaint, a single request for a refund. Every single time we have either increased our total knowledge together or had a laugh out loud moment or both. But I don't do the guarantees anymore because it just sort of takes up time that could be better spent dealing with mysteries. So with no further ado, terms and conditions are at lbc.co.uk. I think I said that, but better safe than sorry. Belt and braces, Keith. Belt and braces. Georgina is in Camden. Georgina, question or answer?
Hi, I've got a question.
Carry on.
So last week, when the Northern Lights were visible in the UK, particularly in London...
No one told me, you know. No one told me. I didn't notice until the next morning.
Maybe you did notice, but you didn't know how to see them.
Oh, tell me more.
That's the problem that I had. So my friend showed me a photo. I went outside and I couldn't see them. And she said, no, take a photo on your phone and then look at your photo. And then I could see the pink and the green and the blue. So I wanted to find out why it was possible to see them through my phone taking a picture, but not with the visible eye, naked eye.
How amazing. I didn't even know that. Did you know that, Keith? Did everyone else know? Two mysteries. How did no one tell? I saw some pictures taken at Harvington Hall, one of my favourite places in the world, down in Worcestershire, and they were amazing. I didn't even know that the Northern Lights ever came that far south. I let alone to Camden. But so you can see it, you take a picture on your phone and you can see them. But if you are standing there relying exclusively upon the naked eye, then you can't. So someone must have said, go out. I mean, it can't just be your friend that discovered this. It was on the news, apparently. I'd stop now, Georgina. I'm making a fool of myself. But I will get you an answer to your question, which will be about the technology, won't it, of photography, and nothing to do with why I was somehow completely ignorant of all of this. Alex is in Clifton. Alex, question or answer?
Hello, James.
Hello,
There's a
Alex.
question.
Carry on.
Listen, good friend of mine has recently got me into running. A bloke called Jamie, who would also say this is his favourite hour of the week.
Fantastic.
And what I'd like
We
to
like
know
Jamie,
is,
yes.
we do. Why is it after about a mile I'll get a stitch? Physiologically, what is a stitch?
I've been doing this for so long now that I've got two occupational hazards, Alex. The first is there's quite a lot of things that we've obviously answered before, but I'm fine with that. The second is I can never remember anything. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. So what is a stitch? What is the fit? And does the stitch diminish as you do more running? I don't mean on that individual run, but as you said, you're relatively new to it. So when you've got a year in the tank, will you get a stitch later in the run, or will you get less of a stitch? Do we know?
Well, he doesn't seem to get one.
There you go.
For me, it feels like a finger under the rib.
It's
but for him,
something
he just
to
carries
do.
on.
It's something to do. I can't. Oh man, alive! I know that this was quite an early mischief, but I can't. No, I've got nothing. Sometimes I like to sort of prevaricate in that way in the hope that the answer will pop into my mind, but it's not going to happen today. Are you enjoying running? Is it a life-changing experience for you?
Yeah, I am enjoying it. It's a nice thing to do, and as the weather and it's darker nights, it's nice to get out and see someone, isn't it? And as a challenge, I'd like to be able to do a half marathon in January.
Good for you.
I've picked it up in the last few weeks.
Yeah, good for you, and good luck with it as well. It is 9 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I get bored. That's the problem. It's all the things I kind of should be. So I'd like ping pong. I'm playing quite a lot of ping pong, but not in the winter. Table tennis, tennis. I just get bored when I'm running alone on my own, or I'm on a rowing machine or something like that. I've tried listening to podcasts. I have, and then the pain overtakes you, doesn't it? There's a sort of. Anyway, I digress. Depends on the podcast. Mine are painful. James is in Royston. James, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's a question, please.
Carry on.
Why is there not a gender-neutral collective noun for aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews? So say I've got parents, I've got grandparents, I've got children, cousins.
Yeah, siblings.
But you can't say the same.
Siblings?
Yes, you can't say the same. Yep, offspring. But you can't say the same for aunts, uncles, nieces and nephews.
Because would it be a double? Because they're already. No, that's not. I mean, is it a mystery? I mean, there's lots of things that we haven't got words for.
Yeah.
Isn't there?
I only asked because I became an uncle for the 5th time.
That's the only reason you've rung
a few
in, isn't
weeks
it? You
ago.
just want to show off. That's fantastic.
Show off that fact.
When you're an uncle, I've got two nephews who I genuinely love equally. But if I had 10, I presume it's you have favourites, right? When you've got that many, because you don't have that parental responsibility as a parent. Even if you did have a favourite, you could never admit it to yourself, let alone to them. But as an uncle, do you feel similarly?
I think they're all different.
Yeah.
But you can choose the time wisely as to when you spend them.
It's a very diplomatic answer. A very diplomatic answer, and a very roundabout way of saying, "Yeah, I've got a favourite, but I'm not going to admit that live on the radio." I've totally got.
Normally it's the youngest one, it's the babies, and then as they grow up, they get their personalities, and you then.
Yeah, exactly. The one that you would rather spend time with. It's, the nibblings. Someone has suggested to me, but I've never come across that word before. Have you?
No, I haven't. That's new.
Well, you have now. I think it might be a new word invented to fill precisely the hole that you've identified on the show this morning.
And does that cover the nieces and nephews or the aunts and uncles as well?
Nieces and nephews.
Okay, so you've still got the aunts and uncles.
So your nibblings. Although, no, but that would be your... No, because that's a cousin, isn't it? So they are your nibblings. But what are the nibblings? What are you to the nibbling?
Exactly.
uncle, nuncle,
Me
niece,
and my wife. Me and my wife to them. Yeah.
Well, you're not really allowed two questions.
It's the same thing, isn't it?
No, it's two distinct questions. You're not really allowed to, and I have answered one of them. So I'm getting that. I don't normally take text answers to this, but I'm going to give a round of applause to everyone who's texted the word nibblings. And I mean, and that means I'll let your second question slide. So I don't know whether it'll be why isn't there a word, or indeed is there a word that James and I have never heard of before, but which has been slowly making its way into common parlance over the last few years. Thank you, James. Andy is in Basingstoke. Why do we question or answer, Andy?
It's a question, James. I'm phoning up from a prize as well, but it might be a double question after what you just said.
Go on.
Why do we have stag and hen do's? Some nonsense on the radio the other day was talking about it. I'll ask this. I'll ask James. He'll know the answer.
I think we've done this one as well, haven't we?
I don't know. I think someone was talking about it last week, earlier in the week on the radio, and no one knew the answer. And they said,
I thought you were joking. It was our phone-in, Andy.
It was.
Yes,
yeah.
Sorry, you are joking, but we didn't address the question of why people have them.
You said whoever rings up gets a prize.
Yeah, you're right. I said there'd be a prize for whoever rings in and says, "Why do we have stag and hen?" Sorry, I was having a cauliflower moment there.
It's all right. It's the age, mate.
I know it is. I was forgetting something that had happened on my own shows. Was that the actual question?
I think so. I wasn't really listening, to be fair.
No. Well, that's very flattering.
That's normal.
That'll be one for Mystery Hour, I said. That's not the one. That's not the one that I've remembered. So I shall. So, as in, why are stags and hens the symbols that we use?
Yeah, that something along those lines.
Yeah. All right. Nice. Well, you're not really getting a prize. What did I say the prize would be, Keith? I said it'd be a round of applause, didn't I?
Something like that.
It's nothing. That's all. Half, please, Keith. Half. That was more than half.
That was harsh.
Was it really? Was that exactly half? You count yourself lucky. Andy, thank you. Pay more attention next time, please. I'm not doing this for my own amusement, 12:13 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Elaine is in Three Rivers. Really?
Afternoon, James.
All at the same time? What is it? 2 legs and an arm?
Afternoon, James. I have a question, please.
Carry on, Elaine.
Why does the government form a cabinet instead of any other piece of furniture? Why cabinet?
I like that one as well. This is another good one, isn't it? Why is it called a cabinet? Do you think that in Old English, the room in which they met would once have been called a cabinet?
I don't know, but I kept hearing Keir Starmer was forming a cabinet, and I've been saving it up for Mystery Hour.
I like it. Why is it called a cabinet and not like a ruling executive or a management team?
A wardrobe.
Well, it wouldn't be a wardrobe, would it, Elaine, for heaven's sake? Do you know what Keith told me this week?
No.
Well, you wouldn't, would you? Do you know why we value IKEA furniture more than its actual worth, more than what it's materially worth?
No.
It's odd, this, but it's because we put it together ourselves. So when we walk past it, we are reminded, either consciously or subconsciously, of the sense of satisfaction that we got from completing it.
Oh, that depends if you've done it right.
That is also very true, but we're working on the presumption that we have done. If you're doing it wrong, then it will have exactly the opposite effect, and you'll think next time, I'm either going to buy something ready-made or I'm going to pay that fella to come round and do it himself with his electric screwdriver.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Why cabinet? And thank you to everyone who's texted me, I think quite charitably, to tell me how much they enjoyed the Three Rivers joke. But I've got a horrible feeling you enjoyed the fact that it went completely over Elaine's head, much more than you enjoyed the actual joke. And after this, I will give you the answer to the, whatchamacallit, the Boris Johnson missing word round. The problem when I do that, I get a bit distracted and I say, whatchamacallit. I'm distracted because I'm trying to remember what's on the list of questions that we've already asked. That's when I make the mistake of accidentally reading out the word that is the missing word, which is where cauliflower comes into proceedings, isn't it? I did a missing word round when the missing word was cauliflower, but I read out the whole sentence and then politely carried on with the missing word round, having revealed the missing word. And then I said the word blank later in the programme, to go back to cultural knowledge that we were talking about in the last hour and the ability to talk very casually about cultural or literary matters. I was banging on about Philip Larkin. One of my favourite lines in Larkin, sense of solving emptiness that lies just under all we do, and for a second get it whole, so permanent and blank and true. And I got about 50 messages saying so permanent and cauliflower and true. I had no idea what was going on. I'd forgotten my... Anyway. Boris Johnson's book, not on sale in Europe due to blank. Find out after this.
Mystery Hour on LBC with James O'Brien.
It is 18 minutes after 12. Questions in need of answers. Why could you take a picture of the Northern Lights the other night and see it on your phone, but you couldn't actually see it with your naked eye? What causes a stitch when you're running? Is there a word for a collective noun for uncles and aunts? No, not a collective noun. Is there a word that describes both in the way that children is gender neutral? Is there a gender neutral description of uncle and aunt? If you're new to this, nibblings apparently is something you can use to describe nieces and nephews. Had you heard that before? It's a nice one. It's a nice one, nibblings, isn't it? What is the origin of stag and hen when it comes to stag nights and hen nights, stag do's and hen do's? And why do we talk about a cabinet in the context of government? Why do heads of the executive form cabinets? Yeah, I did stitch. I've got 5 here. Have you got 5? Yeah, okay. That was an editorial meeting, that was. Hey, we should have more of those. Grace is in Pusey in Wiltshire. Grace, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Grace.
This is for the Northern Lights question.
Yes.
So why can you see them through a phone, but then you can't see them with the naked eye?
Could you see them through a phone? Not just... Yeah, of course you could. So you'd see it on your screen whether you were pressing take a picture or not?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. But it all depends on how bright the lights are. So if the lights are really bright, you can see them.
Right.
And that's because there's 2 different types of cells in your eyes. You have cone cells and rod cells.
Yes.
And cone cells are the ones that see colour, but they only work in the light in the daytime. And then your rod cells see in black and white, and they are the ones that work at night time. So that's why, like, if you go in the garden at night time, you can't see the colours of the flowers.
No, obviously,
because your
great point.
cone cells need colour, need light in order to work. So when you take a photo or you're holding a screen up to the Northern Lights, the light from your screen will activate the cone cells in your eye.
How amazing.
Yeah.
Activate the cone cells in your eyes while you're looking at the screen.
Yeah, so it activates it because then there's sufficient light.
But if you dragged your gaze,
enough.
if you took your gaze away from the screen onto the sky again, you wouldn't see.
You wouldn't see the colour
because you've not got the light going directly into your eyes.
Exactly. Yeah. So your cone cells aren't activated.
What a lovely answer. Qualifications?
About 20 years ago, I did an A-level in human biology, and I've never forgotten it.
That bit, not with reference to the Northern Lights, but just
the cone cells and the rod cells.
And the light and the dark and the colour and why we see colour. That's a beautiful answer. Have a round of applause on me.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jeff is in Hazelmere. Question or answer?
It's sort of part 2 of that answer, really.
So not a challenge, more an embellishment.
No, not a challenge. That's
fantastic.
Much more.
Good.
It's
Carry
good
on.
to speak to you again.
Likewise.
We love your work, James. Carry on.
Thank you, Jeff.
So a camera can record images over several seconds, so it will see things that the naked eye can't see. So it will record the light, however bright or otherwise it is, that you just can't see with a naked eye. It's a bit like...
So the exposure is longer?
That's the one.
But even if I'm not taking a picture, I'm just holding the phone up to the sky.
Yes, but you're effectively, when you're taking that picture...
The camera is still working when I'm holding it up to the sky, even though I'm not pressing record. Or
Yeah, you can't do it on a camera per se. You can do it on a phone because the technology is slightly different. But on a camera, most photographers would record it a number of seconds or even possibly minutes to get the brightest and the most beautiful images.
I like this because we've got the eyes and now we've got the camera. So we've got both sides of the same answer. What are your qualifications?
I'm a photographer.
Have you ever taken pictures of the Northern Lights?
I have, and when I was at university, we said to a guy, he said, I can't see. We were doing star trails, which is a similar kind of thing, recording the movement over several hours, and he looked at the sky and said, I can't see them moving. And we said to him, well, if you stay here for 45 minutes, you'll see it. And we went to the pub and came back, and he was still stood there, and he said, no, I couldn't see anything. Which was a bit cheeky of us, I must admit.
He's still wondering. Jeff, have a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I like that. I can't believe I missed it. Did you see them? Did you see them, Eleanor? Did you see the Northern Lights? Did anyone? Did you? No? I tell you, have a look at the pictures of Harvington Hall down at they're beautiful. Absolutely. Well, they are to me because I know the building really well. Maybe they wouldn't be to you. I digress. Sally, Brexit. I haven't got a sort of form of involuntary speech. Brexit is the answer to the question. So that's 23 minutes after 12 today that we got to without saying Brexit. We stopped doing this a while ago because I'm sure I managed to do entire shows without mentioning Brexit. But it's quite an amusing use of the word Brexit today. Boris Johnson's book, not on sale in Europe due to Brexit. It will be. It just books turn up about a week late because of all the extra checks at the border that we've introduced as a consequence of making our borders easier to... Hang on, that can't be right. Taking back control. There we go. We've taken back control. So that means that if we're exporting... No, that can't be right either because that means that we've got no control whatsoever. It's almost like Brexit was built entirely on lies and nonsense, but at least there's a silver lining. Finally, a Brexit benefit. Boris Johnson's book has gone on sale, or will go on sale, a week later than it otherwise would have done because of the new checks and stuff involved in getting them into Europe. I suppose that's a benefit for Europe, isn't it? 24 minutes after 12 is the time. Sally is in Guildford. Sally, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on, Sally.
Why is toothpaste always minty?
Well, I'm afraid it's not.
Well, I've never come across toothpaste that isn't. All toothpaste seems to be minty, no matter what you buy. And I'm not very keen on mint, so I have to sort of tolerate minty toothpaste.
Well, I mean, you say you're not keen on mint, but you haven't tried very hard to find a non-mint toothpaste, have you?
Well, I think I probably...
You haven't... I don't think you've
not.
even Googled it, Sally, if we're honest with each other.
I have actually. I have Googled it.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yes, I have, and I didn't come up with a satisfactory answer.
They're often for children, aren't they? So you've got...
Well, when I was a student,
yes.
back in those days, a friend and I decided we'd buy that, that Punch and Judy toothpaste. It was a bit of a joke, we were sort of 19 and we thought that was a thing to do. You buy Punch and Judy toothpaste just for a novelty.
Okay.
And even that had a trace of mint in it.
Oh. Well, I
just
think
don't see the benefit.
No, I do. I think mint does something to your mouth. It does something that there's a peach. There's a peaches and cream toothpaste made by Colgate, would you believe? Do you think that might float your boat?
Well, if I can find it, I'll give it a whirl.
It's on the Boots website at the moment. You can get it for half price if you're quick. I think that they might. I know. Well, today's a good day, isn't it? I bet you weren't expecting this sort of service when you rang in.
No, I wasn't. I was expecting somebody to tell me that there was some deep scientific reason for this.
I think there is a deep scientific reason. I think it's to do with, you probably don't eat many mints, but it makes your mouth cooler.
True.
And that feels clean for some reason. Whether it is a mark of cleanliness or not, I do not know. But when we've done things about wind chill factor and why when you eat a mint, I forget exactly what the question was. Mints do something, don't they? That the actual chemicals in the mint do something to your mouth. They make your mouth feel cooler.
Oh.
And that is probably why mint is associated with a sense of hygiene, a sense of cleanliness. But I will find out. So why are almost all toothpastes minty? I'll just slightly edit your question.
Punch and Judy. I don't even know they make that stuff anymore.
I don't know what you're talking about with the Punch and Judy toothpaste. I don't know whether that has slipped my memory.
It was a thing. Believe me, it was a thing.
Oh, well, of course I believe you, Sally. I'm not going to come on national radio and invent a toothpaste, are you? That would just be weird behaviour. But and just for your peace of mind, I didn't invent the peach one. I'm looking, God, there's another one as well. Colgate also do one with fresh natural extracts with Asian lemon oil and aloe. You've not looked at all.
I have. Oh, dear. I haven't looked hard enough, have I, James?
Willy Wonka does a chocolate toothpaste.
I bet that has a hint of mint as well.
A hint of mint.
A hint of mint.
It might have a minty hint.
And may I just say, James?
You may.
Well done.
Thank you.
For finding the one and only benefit of Brexit.
Well, no, don't forget my book sales, Sally.
Oh, yes, of course.
And the Boris Johnson's opposite, although I don't think he's going to have any problem shifting a few units in the coming weeks. Thank you, Sally. Why is toothpaste almost always minty? And does the Willy Wonka chocolate toothpaste have a hint of mint? That perhaps is a question for a different day. I've remembered the question I was going to ask. I don't normally let myself do this, but what's the point of inventing rules and games if you're not allowed to do whatever you want with them? So Jones the engineer, formerly of this parish, who regular listeners will fondly remember, still in the building, I told you a while ago he's taken up flying, proper flying in planes. And I don't know why, but I was intrigued to know who washes them. And we think nobody washes his plane, his small plane. It's not his own, but you go to the airfield and you borrow the plane, you rent the plane. But do they have plane washers in big airports? Because they'd have to be very wide. How do they wash jumbo jet? Is that a bad question for Mystery Hour? I think that's quite a good question. I invented Mystery Hour. Why am I asking you whether it's a good question or not? Let's ask the inventor of Mystery Hour. Is that a good question for Mystery Hour? That's a brilliant question for Mystery Hour. Do they wash jumbo jets? They must do, right? Because if you're getting on a dirty plane, it's a bit like the toothpaste question. They've got windscreen wipers, but not like the whole plane. You want, do they wash the wings, for example? I'm putting that on the list. Do they wash planes? From James in Leicester Square. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Jenny Barsby has your headlines.
This is LBC Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973.
12:32 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The questions still in need of answers include, we've done that one, what causes a stitch when you are running? Is there a gender-neutral term to describe the uncles and aunts of nibblings? What is the origin of the stag and the hen in the context of stag and hen do's? Why do we talk of a cabinet? Why do prime ministers assemble a cabinet? And to give Elaine's question its full weight and not any other item of furniture. Sally wants to know why almost all toothpaste is minty. And James in Leicester Square wants to know how you wash planes. And unfortunately, I have no way of knowing whether all of the people who've told me that you use a jet wash are providing a helpful answer to the question or a rather good pun. Normally, I'd think there's so many people making the same point, it must be the correct answer. But it's equally possible that there are so many people making the same joke. It would be a jet wash. So I'll leave it on the board for now. Gary's in Hamilton. Gary, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Yes. Last week there was a comet, and it said that this comet last passed the Earth 80,000 years ago.
Wow.
Yes. So my question is very simple. How the heck do they know it's 80,000 years ago?
It was definitely a comet.
It was definitely a comet, yes. It was definitely a comet. It was on the TV, etc., yeah.
What was it called? What was the comet called?
I can't remember. I didn't look it up to find out. I can't remember the name of it, to be honest with you. But you can obviously have a look if you wanted to have a look on it.
Well, I'm not really supposed to Google things, although I did just Google fruity toothpaste, which is a bit of a breach of the regulations. I think I might know the answer to this.
Well, I was hoping you wouldn't, but carry on.
Well, I was reading about, not Leonardo da Vinci, the other one, Galileo Galilei, the other day, as you do. And what was quite popular at the time of Galileo was to construct, once he came up with the theory of didn't come up with the theory, once he followed the Copernican lead and established, much to the fury of the Pope and the Church and the rest of it and all the priests, he established that the sun is at the centre of our universe, not the earth, as had previously been believed. And the poor fella, as you know, got locked up for the rest of his life as a consequence of making this point. He became a heretic. He was persona non grata for the rest of his natural days. But he was still right. You know, it's a bit like Brexit. He was still right. It doesn't matter how many people told him he was wrong. The proof was right there in front of you.
But this was 80,000 years ago.
Wait, I haven't even started yet, Gary.
Oh, go on.
Pull up, mate. You might want to sit down.
I'm in the middle of the road, yeah.
All right. Well, don't sit down then, whatever you do. So they were popular. All of the sort of regional rulers in Italy had pocket scientists. They had like astronomers and people. It used to be a great sign of wealth to have like really clever people on your payroll. I mean, this is how the big libraries got built, and a lot of them were searching for alchemy as well, looking for alchemists. But you build. There's a word for it that I was hoping would come to me while I was blathering on like this, but it hasn't. Imagine a massive 3D model of the universe.
Yeah.
Have you done that?
It's in my head.
Right. And now put the comet in it.
Yeah.
And now turn it.
Yes.
And now estimate 80,000 years.
But how would they know it's 80,000 years?
Because they know it's 24 hours. And they're turning it. This is unlikely to be the right answer, I think.
It is absolutely one of your best rubbish answers you've ever given. Try not to swear there. Trust me, I really try not to swear.
But you don't have enough detail to come to be so condescending. You might have misheard it. It might have been 8,000 years.
No, it's definitely 80,000.
So it's not even a... So there was a comment last week that you can't remember the name of, but you can definitely remember that it's not going to be back for another 80,000 years.
That's what they said. It was 80,000 years ago. Yes, definitely.
Solar system. The sun is the centre of the solar system, not the universe.
Yeah, well, there you go, James. There you go. So, if anybody out there...
It's a model. It's a model. They've modelled it.
But 80,000 is a long time. It wasn't even like 8,000 or whatever. Even if they said 8,000, nobody was literally around 8,000, let alone 80,000.
It's either, Gary, an orrery...
Whatever that says.
An orrery.
Yeah, go on.
Or an astrolabe. That's what you need. You need to get yourself either an orrery or an astrolabe. I think it's an orrery.
Okay.
Get yourself an orrery. Stick a comet in your orrery.
Yeah.
Give your orrery a spin. 80,000 years worth of, and that's where you spin it until you've reached 80,000 years worth of spins, and then up pops the comet again. It's maths. It's maths, isn't it?
Right. Well, if anybody knows the true answer to that one, I would appreciate that.
It's periodicity, is what it is. Periodicity. What is Gary talking about? 0345 6060 973. Comet, innit? Kieran's in Dublin. Comet, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on.
Question, simple one. How do WhatsApp make their money?
Do we know that they do?
Well, there's nothing for nothing, is there?
Well, there is. I mean, for a long time, Twitter still runs at an enormous loss.
Yeah, but they ran advertising.
They did run advertising. How does WhatsApp make? I don't know that WhatsApp does make money.
But someone's paying for it.
Yeah, but it's part of Meta. So Facebook makes money through advertising. WhatsApp, I mean, it's all part of the same package.
But I'm not on Facebook, and I only use Twitter. I'm not on Instagram. Or not Twitter, I only use WhatsApp.
Yeah, well, they might not be making any money out of you, but it doesn't mean they're not making any money at all. I'm just looking at it now. It's just a messaging service, isn't it? What's it? You've got some communities in there and stuff, but do they make money? I'm not in any communities. Do we pay to be on? Do LBC pay?
Advertising on it to make money. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know. I shall find out for you. It's on the list.
Excellent. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's thank you, Kieran. 0345 6060 973. How does WhatsApp make its money? How do they know that a comet that was here last week isn't going to be back for another 80,000 years? Brackets, or is Gary chatting gibberish? How do they wash jumbo jets? I don't think the answer is a jet wash, but it might be. Why is almost all toothpaste minty? Why do governments have cabinets? Why do celebrations of imminent nuptials involve stags and hens? Why do people get stitches? How do people get stitches? And is there a gender-neutral term for uncles and aunts? We're staying on the other side of the sea. Rory's in Newry. Rory, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, Rory.
So I'm a big fan of sparkling water.
So am I.
And are you a big fan too?
Yeah, I love the stuff.
That makes me feel a bit more upper class. But my question is, now my family don't like sparkling water. And there's always an odd bottle floating around. My question is, when sparkling water goes flat, how come it doesn't taste like water?
It tastes like water, but it doesn't taste like tap water or flat water. It has a slightly...
Exactly.
Well, it's minerals, isn't it?
But there's minerals in all water. They all go through the natural mineral process. You can read that on the back of them. And when it comes to sparkling water, in most cases, it's just been carbonated. A lot of the times carbonated naturally. So why, whenever that carbonation is gone...
How much work have you done in this space?
How much work have I done in this space? Well, I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur of
well, have you ever let water go flat and then chilled it? While flat and then drunk. Oh, okay. And that tastes different.
Not in an experimental way like you're describing. More, I've put half a bottle of sparkling water in the fridge.
Yeah.
It went flat. I went to give it to my daughter to go to bed. She takes a taste. I says,
Why does flat fizzy water taste different from permanently flat, always flat water, perma-flat water?
Just standard water.
Standard water. You sure they don't add anything to the fizzy water?
Yeah, sure. I've looked at the back of a can. of sparkling water, which I think is sufficient research for this question.
I do too. Okay, you're on. I mean, it is something I've also noted. Do you have a favourite brand?
I like to use this brand called Cano. I don't like to drink out of plastic bottles. I like to stick to cans. Okay. So I get a delivery of things called Cano sparkling water.
Is that the one that's hard to open with the weird fiddly bit on top?
No. It's a black can. I see if you're on a boat or a plane, they normally sell them at about 10
I've seen them,
can.
but we've got some here that they're quite hard to open.
In the elemental surge, where thunder reigns supreme. It's the clash of wills, where lightning strikes with might, unyielding its course through darkness and through light. No beams of wit unfold in victory or defeat. Resolve in every heart, complete.
I think you can reseal them. Is that why they're hard to open? So it's like a tin that you can reseal. Have you not? Because I give them out sometimes when I'm doing full disclosure, and a couple of my guests have been unable to open them, and it's quite an embarrassing thing. It gets the interview off to a bad start if someone can't open their can, and you say, "Would you like me to do that for you?" And they're thinking, "Well, I'm not simple. I know how to open a can." And then and it's one of those things that you think you've got the knack of it, and then you remember still water is what we're talking about, not flat water. So what's the difference between flat water and still water?
When they're flat.
No, because it is flat. If it can only be flat if it was once fizzy.
That's true.
So it's the difference between still. Why does flat water taste different from still water?
When it's flat.
Yeah. No!
Oh, yeah, no, you're right. No, you're right. Sorry, you've confused me, Jim. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I'm confusing you now. Why does flat water taste different from still water?
So we're saying flat water isn't still water. Flat water is the flat version. Correct, because
it used to be fizzy. It used to be fizzy. It can't go flat, can it, unless it was fizzy, Rory?
That's a fair point, James. That's a fair point.
Thank you very much. You don't know how WhatsApp make their money, do you, by any chance?
Well, actually, I'm quite involved in that sector. They don't make money. They're completely...
breaking rules. I'm a maverick, riding roughshod over all the. I think we had just heard a bit there. Steve's in Crawley. Steve, question or answer?
Hello, answer, please, James.
Carry on, Steve.
To the stitch. Oh, by the way, it was Comet A3.
Was it?
Yes, but anyway. Stitch.
And did you hear the 80,000 years bit of it as well?
Yes, I did.
Oh, all right. Sorry, Gary. My apologies.
That's absolutely true.
No, that's fine. I apologise to Gary for that.
I could answer that one, but we're only allowed one, aren't we?
Correct.
But,
and you're doing the stitch.
Yeah, stitch. Yeah, there's no common cause for it. There's no single cause for it, sorry. It's just basically a global term for a pain in the side while you're running. But the most common cause is lack of blood supply to the diaphragm, which can lead to cramp of the diaphragm, usually caused by shallow breathing or breathing out of rhythm to your running stride.
Oh, so the more adept you become at running, the less likely you are to get a stitch.
Yeah, marathon runners very rarely get it.
Oh, I like that. How interesting. Qualifications?
Yeah. Believe it or not, when you were a wee baby, I was UK #1 junior 400-metre hurdler.
That's sensational. How wee a baby
back in 1972.
Oh, crikey.
Back in 1972.
That is the year I was born.
There you go.
And you didn't progress into the adults? Or did you?
Got injured, unfortunately, when I was 19. I tore a load of tendons in my ankle, and that was the end of my athletics career. I used to run with Alan Pascoe and David Hemery, if you remember those names.
Yeah, do I remember the names? Gosh, how exciting. I mean, it's probably not much of a comfort to you, but as a hurdler, I'm now talking about you, not me, obviously. I would never begin a sentence with the words "as a hurdler." But when you tell me that you were a very high-level hurdler and that you had an injury, I'm automatically thinking of an area very different from your ankle, mate. Because for non-hurdlers, you take your life in your hands when you do that.
No, never ever have I known someone who's hurt that part of their anatomy hurdling. No.
I suppose that's the deterrent.
I know what you mean.
That's why you jump so high.
Especially with high hurdles. Especially with high hurdles.
Yeah, well, exactly that. That's a lovely answer. Round of applause for Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 12:45 is the time.
Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. This is LBC.
12:48 is the time. Northern Lights done. Stitches done. Uncles not done. Stags and Hens not done. Cabinet not done. Toothpaste not done. Washing planes not done. Comet not done. WhatsApp not done. Sparkling water. Quite a few making the same joke. It's the kind of joke that would appeal to me, actually. It does appeal to me. At the end of the day, sparkling water is still water. Do you like that one? Not really? It's all right. Tom's in great done mode. Tom, question or answer?
I actually have an answer for you,
Carry on.
which were in regards to washing the planes.
Marvellous.
I actually used to do it about 14 years ago.
Did you really?
Yeah, so what it is you go out sort of like as a team, and as strange as it sounds, you used to have like these big mop and buckets, and you clean the underside of the plane, whilst one person would go up in the cherry pick and spray it down.
Oh, wow, yeah. So I mean, really by hand...
It sounds a bit almost like made up, but honestly, it's actually true.
No, why not use... So you've got a jet wash would take too long. No, why not use a jet wash then? I mean, maybe they do now.
I don't know if it was just because the underside of the plane was more dirty, because it'd be like black smoky sort of stuff almost.
Coming up from the runway, it would get coated, wouldn't it? Like
yeah, so that's the bit that we would mainly clean with, obviously, the mop and buckets to get the...
So you've got to get stuck into that a bit in a way that... Oh, I love this. What airport was it?
Stansted Airport.
How long did you do it for?
In all honesty, only about 6 months.
Because it was such hard work, or...?
No, it was a really cushy job. You used to have to go and clean 2 planes, and you could go home.
Well, only 2 planes a night?
Yeah, and then you get paid for the whole night, so it was quite good.
Really?
Yeah, it was quite cushy. Then it wasn't really enough hours, so I had to leave.
Oh, fair enough. Well, you could have done more planes, you prune.
No, I didn't get a choice. It was 2, and then that was it done.
Oh, I see. You couldn't say, hey, I'll tell you what, give us a bit of overtime, I'll do another plane.
I wish.
Fair. Oh, well, you live and learn. What are you doing now? What do you do after that?
So I actually sell furniture now.
Oh. What do you prefer?
Cleaning planes.
Let's give a round of applause for Tom. The deadpan delivery there was absolutely perfect. Thank you, Tom. Toby's in Peckham. Toby, question or answer?
It is an answer, James.
Carry on, Toby.
So it's the answer to the WhatsApp question.
Yes.
I'll start by asking you a question. Do you have Facebook?
Yes.
Do you ever log out of your Facebook app on your phone?
I don't have it on my phone. I'm a bit weird like that.
Okay, all right. Well, most people that have Facebook never, ever log out.
Yeah.
It just runs in the background.
Of course, yes.
And Facebook own WhatsApp.
Yes.
And so they pull everything, and Instagram, so they pull everything you look at and everything you say all together to probably one of the most targeted and richest data sets in the world to sell advertising.
On Facebook?
On Facebook, and
so
on Instagram.
So something that they glean from WhatsApp could end up influencing what I am offered on Facebook?
Potentially. It's end-to-end encrypted, but that doesn't mean to say, and I'll never admit it, that they might be skimming keywords out of conversations.
No, well, we don't need to speculate. I mean, the short answer is, in the traditional and obvious sense, they're not making money in the way that Kieran meant.
For Meta, they're definitely making money.
So, that's what I mean. It's part of the empire.
Yes, it is a big part of the empire, yes.
And the empire is profitable.
Very, 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 very profitable.
Qualifications, please.
28 years in the media agency industry.
Really?
Yeah.
Still going?
No.
No.
I quit about 5 years ago.
Okay.
I'm now a carpenter.
And well, that's nice as well. Hey, I could put you in touch with the last fella, and he could sell the furniture that you make. He could sell the furniture that you make, and then
exactly. Yeah, put us together.
You flog enough of his cabinets, and he could go back to cleaning planes.
Well, I'm not going back to media, that's for sure.
No, good for you. It's a mugs game, Toby. Round of applause for Toby. What was the name of the lad who washed the planes? I've got Toby on my list next to WhatsApp for Kieran's question. What was the name of the plane washer turned? It was Tom, wasn't it? Yeah. 12:52 is the time. Thank you, Toby. Graham's in Bromley. Graham, question or answer?
It's an answer for you, James.
Yes.
It's the answer to the sort of non-binary aunt-uncle question.
Carry on.
It's amazingly simple. It's parent-sibling, which is pibbling. I believe it's even in the.
So nibblings and pibblings.
A pibbling.
Yeah, but a
parent
nibbling
pibbling.
is the nephew niece non-gender specific, non-binary word, a gender neutral word for both boy and girl and non-binary. They can all be nibblings, and the same with
They could be nibblings. Yes.
aunts and uncles and non-binary siblings of your parents would be pibblings, or their partners.
Yes.
So a pibbling's partner is a pibbling.
A pibbling's partner is a pibbling.
So you've got two pibblings.
Yes, you have.
Qualifications?
I've got my youngest non-binary child is the pibbling to my granddaughter.
Oh, how? And we know that this is a word that is that resonates beyond your own immediate family, do we, Graham?
Yes, I'm quite certain of it.
This is lovely.
But yes, so my youngest prefers to be known as Pibble rather than Pibbling, but you take your pick.
Pibblings and nibblings, you live and learn, and lovely qualifications as well. A round of applause for Graham. Look at that. Yeah, I told you learned something on this programme, and if you hadn't learned anything so far, pibblings and nibblings, I think has refreshed the parts. Thank you, Graham. John's in Eltham. John, question or answer?
Answer, please, James.
Carry on, John.
About the cabinet, why
yes.
the meetings of the ministers are called cabinet.
Yes.
It's when the first prime minister was appointed. It was at the beginning of the 18th century, 1720s, 1730s. It was the beginning of the time when landed gentlemen were sending their sons on the grand tour.
Yes.
And the thing was to come back with curiosities that you'd picked up to show how far you'd been.
I am familiar with this.
Yeah, I thought you might be. These were kept in a large, specially made piece of furniture that had lots and lots of little compartments and drawers and cupboards in it. And that was the gentleman's cabinet. And it was kept in his most private and secret quarters in his house. After dinner, he would take his guests
and show them his curiosities.
In his cabinet.
And are we? I'm conscious of the time. Are we confident that from that came the tradition of calling the cabinet the cabinet?
Yes, because in the 1730s, at the time of Walpole, the room where the collection was kept was beginning to be called the cabinet.
The whole room.
His cabinet, the whole room. And Walpole would take his ministers into that room to discuss government business because the King, George I, couldn't speak English. So Walpole had to have a translator that he could translate what the King had said to the ministers who were advising his Whig administration.
That's amazing.
And it had to be kept somewhere very secret and very quiet.
So they called it the cabinet. It became the cabinet. The cabinet became the cabinet. Cabinet.
You kept the cabinet in the cabinet.
Qualifications?
Beg pardon?
Qualifications. What are your qualifications? How do you know this?
Fascinated by 18th century history. Read a lot of the diaries of the period. Joseph Farrington, Fanny Burney.
Fanny Burney. Is there any greater qualification than fascination, John?
Well, I don't know if it's a qualification. But
not you. I mean, I'm being philosophical. I'm saying, like, wistfully, oh, John, is there any greater qualification than fascination? I wasn't saying, have you got anything else? I'm saying it's the best qualification of all, isn't it?
I've got no idea. I'm still trying to work out if I've got an ordinary orrery or an unordinary orrery.
It's all about the astrolabes. And you could have an extraordinary orrery. Have a round of applause either way. Thank you, John. What a beautiful answer.
Very much.
No, thank you. I look forward to more of this. Chris is in Walthamstoke. Question or answer, Chris?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, mate.
An answer to how you can work out the orbit of a comet.
Yes, so how do we know that the A3 isn't coming back for 80,000 years?
It's because of a man called Johannes Kepler,
who
made 3 rules of planetary motion.
Oh, yes.
All orbits are ellipses.
Correct.
And the quadrant taken from the object through the sun in part of an orbit to another part of an orbit, the area...
Oh, yes.
in size is equal to the amount of time.
So he modelled
each
it.
quadrant is equal.
So he modelled
So
it.
you have a very fast movement around the sun when it gets close.
Yeah. So he
is
did
equal
maths.
to an area.
He did
with
maths.
A much slower movement when it gets further out.
He modelled it.
I can't remember the actual equation. I think it's the square root of the
Don't worry, mate.
major
Seriously.
axis. Is
No, I
equal
know
to
it. It's all right. I know it, but I don't want to show off. I know the answer. So he modelled it. It's a mathematical equation. You extrapolate from...
As soon as he sussed out they weren't perfect circles...
Bingo. Then the rest fell into place. So you extrapolate from observable phenomena, you can predict the future. Because the laws of science, the laws of physics are constant. You've just tried to explain Kepler's laws over the phone. Is that the first time in your life you've done that?
Yeah. Also, you can't fit a comet in an orrery.
You can't, no, because it would have to be absolutely flipping enormous. Well, you could technically, but you'd need an
orrery. I made one.
Did you really?
Yeah, I bought one of those magazines that you get a bit every week.
You made your own orrery?
Well, you get the brass.
But did you see it out to the end? Because normally you buy the first few and then you get bored or it's too expensive and you don't bother finishing it, so you've only got half of Uranus.
That almost happened to me, but I kicked up a fuss, so they sent me the whole lot all in one go.
Did they? Come on, get you with your sharp elbows. So you completed your orrery.
And an astrolabe, they sent that as well because they got me mixed up with somebody else.
So keep that under your hat. Keep that under your hat, Chris. And those are your qualifications.
Yeah, and I did a thing called a MOOC.
A what?
A massive online course
a MOOC.
You can do for free.
Wow.
I studied physics at MIT under a professor called Walter Lewin.
Flipping out, mate. I tell you what,
loads of fun.
Perhaps there is a qualification greater than fascination, although you didn't get the... favourite is impossible, actually, this week. We've had so much to choose from. I'm giving it to Tom to remind him every time he plays the Mystery Hour board game of the great happy days he had. Nights, the happy nights he spent washing planes. That's it from me for another day. We'll do it all again tomorrow morning from 10. If you missed anything, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.